The ancient silver pines whispered secrets only those with wolf blood could understand. Magnus Blackwood stood atop a weathered granite outcropping, his powerful frame silhouetted against the twilight sky. The wind carried scents from miles around, telling stories more precise than any human scout could report. His nostrils flared, catching the unmistakable metallic tang that made his muscles tense. Silver. He closed his eyes, listening to the forest beneath him. 7 generations of silver pine alphas had stood upon this very rock, watching over the territories that had been entrusted to their protection since time beyond memory. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. An alpha does not rule the pack, Magnus. The pack is not yours to command, but yours to serve. At 45, Magnus had served as Alpha King for nearly 2 decades. The silver streaks at his temples had been earned through years of vigilance, of hard choices made for the greater good of his people. His face, once youthful and eager, now bore the dignified lines of a man who had witnessed both triumph and tragedy. A rustle in the underbrush drew his attention. Victor emerged from the tree line, his weathered frame moving with the deliberate grace of an experienced beta. At 62, Victor had served 3 generations of Blackwood Alphas, his loyalty as unwavering as the mountains that bordered their territory to the north. "The Eastern Plains Patrol found more traps," Victor said, his voice a deep rumble that matched the approaching thunder on the horizon. Silver-tipped arrows, hunting blinds built into the old oak grove. Magnus exhaled slowly, tasting the coming storm on his tongue. Humans, not the villagers who lived peacefully at the borders of Silver Pine territory. They understood the ancient pact. These were hunters, mercenaries who sought wolf pelts and claws for trophies and dark magic. "How close to the main settlement?" Magnus asked, his voice level despite the anger building beneath his skin. 10 miles, closer than last time." Victor joined him on the outcropping, his eyes scanning the darkening forest with practiced precision. "The council is concerned, especially with the gathering approaching. 4 packs converging while hunters prowl our borders." The gathering. Magnus felt the weight of it settle across his shoulders like a familiar cloak. Every 7 years, the 5 major packs came together to renew alliances, settle disputes, and, most importantly to the council, allow eligible alphas to seek mates from outside their own pack. The tradition was as old as the Silver Pines themselves. Magnus had postponed his participation twice since Lydia's death. The council had permitted it once out of respect for his grief, twice out of tradition. A 3rd refusal would be unprecedented. Dangerous. "Cormac spoke again at the council meeting yesterday," Victor said, careful to keep his tone neutral. "He believes your continued reluctance to take a new mate endangers the pack's future. Without an heir, I know what Cormac believes." The words emerged as a growl, deeper than human. The beast within him stirred, responding to the challenge even in its indirect form. Magnus forced himself to breathe deeply, to push back the primal urge to assert dominance. Cormac was ambitious, calculating, and unfortunately correct in this one matter. A pack without a clear succession invited challenge, both from within and without. Victor nodded, knowing when to press and when to retreat. 20 years of counsel had taught him to read Magnus better than anyone alive. "The Northern Mountains delegation arrives tomorrow. Harold brings his daughter, Elena. Southern Lakes and Western Valleys follow 2 days after." "And Eastern Plains?" Magnus asked, though he already knew the answer. "Tyrus sends word they will arrive on the eve of the full moon itself, as always pushing the boundaries of courtesy." A humorless smile touched Magnus's lips. Tyrus, Alpha of Eastern Plains, never missed an opportunity to display his disdain for tradition. Their territories had been rivals long before Magnus or Tyrus were born. The first fat droplets of rain began to fall, tapping against the stone beneath their feet. Magnus tilted his face upward, letting the water trace cool paths down his skin. For a moment, he allowed himself to remember another rainstorm, 20 years earlier, when he'd first met Lydia during a similar gathering. Her laugh, the way raindrops had clung to her eyelashes like diamonds, the scent of wildflowers that always surrounded her. The memories no longer cut as deeply as they once had, but the hollow ache remained. Not just for Lydia, but for the child she had carried, the future that had died with them both when the internal wars tore through the packs. A future he had failed to protect. "I'll meet with the Northern delegation tomorrow," Magnus said finally, his voice steady once more. Make sure Harold and his daughter are given the eastern guest quarters, the ones overlooking the ancient grove." Victor's eyebrows rose slightly. The eastern quarters were among the most prestigious in the Silver Pine stronghold. "And the others?" "House them according to tradition, but double the border patrols tonight and throughout the gathering. I want to know immediately if those hunters make any move closer to our territory." Victor nodded and departed without another word, leaving Magnus alone with the intensifying storm. When the beta was well out of sight, Magnus allowed his shoulders to slump slightly, the weight of leadership momentarily visible in his posture. He had made a vow at Lydia's grave, beneath the oldest silver pine in the heart of their territory. He would never again allow his personal desires to override his duty to the pack, would never again let someone he loved become a target because of their connection to him. The price was too high. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the vast territory that stretched out before him. Forest gave way to meadow, meadow to the distant shimmer of the Great Lake, and beyond that, the territories of the other packs, all connected, all balanced in a fragile peace that had been hard-won after years of bloodshed. Magnus turned away from the view and began the descent back to the stronghold. His patrol wasn't scheduled to end for another hour, but he needed to prepare for tomorrow's diplomatic dance. 20 years as Alpha King had taught him that preparation often meant the difference between peace and conflict. The main path was quicker, but instinct guided him to take the hidden trails that wound through the densest part of the forest. These were the paths known only to those born of Silver Pine blood, passed down through generations. The rain intensified, drumming against the canopy above and transforming the forest floor into a tapestry of earthy scents. He paused at a small clearing, his senses suddenly alert. Something was wrong. The forest had gone silent. No bird calls, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Magnus inhaled deeply, sorting through the scents carried on the rain-washed air. Blood, human sweat, metal, and something else. Something unexpected. A scent like mountain snow and wild herbs, clean and sharp, yet with an underlying sweetness he couldn't identify. A woman's scream cut through the silence, distant but clear to his enhanced hearing. Without hesitation, Magnus broke into a run, moving through the forest with the sure-footed speed that came from a lifetime navigating these woods. As he ran, he shed his human limitations, allowing the change to flow through him. Bones shifted, muscles expanded, senses heightened even further as he transformed into his wolf form. The massive black wolf with silver-tipped fur burst through the underbrush into another clearing, where the scents had led him. The scene before him unfolded with brutal clarity. 4 men dressed in dark leather and armed with crossbows had surrounded a woman. She stood with her back against an ancient oak, one hand pressed to her shoulder where blood stained the fabric of her simple gray traveling cloak. Despite her injury, she held a long knife in her other hand, her stance indicating she knew how to use it. The woman was striking, tall and lean, with hair the color of pure silver that fell in a thick braid down her back. Not the silver of age, but a shade so pale it seemed to capture and reflect the stormy light. Her eyes, even from this distance, were an unusual blue-gray that reminded Magnus of the sky before a winter storm. One of the hunters lunged forward, clearly believing the injured woman to be easy prey. She proved him wrong with a swift, precise movement that opened a long gash across his forearm. The man howled in pain and rage, stumbling back as his companions raised their weapons. Magnus didn't hesitate. With a growl that reverberated through the clearing, he launched himself at the nearest hunter. The man barely had time to turn before powerful jaws clamped around his crossbow arm. Bone crunched beneath Magnus's teeth, and the weapon clattered to the forest floor. The others reacted with practiced coordination, swinging their weapons toward this new threat. Magnus released his first victim and darted away, drawing their attention from the woman. One bolt whistled past his ear, another buried itself in the ground where he had stood a heartbeat before. The injured hunter scrambled backward, screaming about demons and wolves. Magnus circled the remaining 3, herding them together with strategic lunges and feints. These were no ordinary hunters. They moved with the precision of men who had trained together, who knew how to fight as a unit. "Silver bolts!" one shouted, fumbling with his crossbow. "Use the damn silver!" Magnus tensed. Silver wouldn't kill him, but it would slow him down, weaken him enough that their numbers might prove decisive. He needed to end this quickly. He feinted toward one man, then abruptly changed direction, catching another hunter's leg in his jaws and dragging him to the ground. The man's scream cut off as Magnus clamped down on his throat, not killing, but threatening enough that the message was clear. Then something unexpected happened. The silver-haired woman darted forward, moving with a grace that belied her injury. In one fluid motion, she snatched up the fallen crossbow and fired it at the hunter, who was loading a silver bolt. The projectile took him in the thigh, and he went down with a howl of pain. The remaining hunter looked from his fallen companions to the massive black wolf, then turned and fled into the forest. Magnus released his captive, who scrambled away after his friend without looking back. For a moment, silence reclaimed the clearing. Rain pattered through the canopy, washing away the sense of fear and blood. Magnus turned slowly toward the woman, who stood watching him with those storm-colored eyes. She didn't run, didn't cower. Instead, she lowered the crossbow and regarded him with an expression that bordered on recognition. "I suppose I should thank you," she said, her voice low and melodious despite the tension of the moment, though I had the situation under control. Magnus studied her, maintaining his wolf form. Most humans would be terrified to address a wolf his size, yet she spoke as if having a conversation in a marketplace. More intriguing still, she showed none of the deference a wolf from another pack would display before an alpha. She was either remarkably brave, remarkably foolish, or something else entirely. The woman winced, pressing her hand more firmly against her wounded shoulder. "They were tracking me for 3 days. I thought I'd lost them at the river." She glanced at the bodies of the unconscious hunters. "They'll bring more when they wake. They always do." Magnus made a decision. With practiced control, he initiated the change, bones and muscles shifting once more until he stood before her in his human form. He was aware of the intimidating picture he presented, 6.5 feet of muscle and scars, dressed in the dark leather and woven fabrics that marked him as Silver Pine royalty. The woman's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't step back. Instead, she gave him a swift, assessing look that took in everything from his silver-streaked black hair to the ceremonial dagger at his belt. "Alpha," she said, inclining her head in acknowledgement, though notably not in submission. "I didn't realize I'd crossed into Silver Pine territory. I meant no trespass." "You're injured," Magnus replied, his voice rough from the transformation. "And those men were hunting in my territory without permission. Both concerns outweigh any question of trespass." A faint smile touched her lips. "Diplomatic. I wouldn't have expected that from the infamous Magnus Blackwood." The use of his name surprised him, though he kept his expression neutral. His reputation extended beyond Silver Pine, certainly, but there was something in her tone, a familiarity that suggested more than just knowledge of his title. "You have me at a disadvantage," he said, moving closer to examine her wound. "You know who I am, but I don't know you." "Scarlet Winters." She didn't flinch as he carefully moved her hand away from the injury. "Healer and herbalist. I was searching for moonflower root. It only grows in old-growth forests like this one." The wound was deep but clean, a knife slash rather than a crossbow bolt. Magnus frowned. "Moonflower root is rare, but not worth risking your life over. Why would professional hunters track you for 3 days?" Scarlet met his gaze steadily. "Perhaps they simply enjoy the challenge." It was an evasion, and not a particularly convincing one. Magnus chose not to press, for now. "That wound needs proper attention. My stronghold is less than an hour's walk from here." "Thank you, but I can tend to it myself." She reached for a leather satchel that had fallen nearby, wincing as the movement pulled at her injury. "I have supplies." Magnus noticed the fine quality of the satchel, worn but well-crafted from excellent materials. Like her clothing, it suggested someone of means rather than a wandering healer. Another inconsistency. "I insist," he said, using the tone that even his most stubborn council members knew better than to argue with. "Those men weren't ordinary hunters. If they've targeted you specifically, you'll be safer within Silver Pine walls while you recover." Scarlet hesitated, her expression suggesting an internal debate. Finally she nodded. "Very well, but only until the wound heals. I have commitments elsewhere." "Of course." Magnus retrieved her satchel, noting its substantial weight. More books than herbs from the feel of it. "Can you walk, or would you prefer assistance?" "I can walk." She straightened her posture, visibly pushing aside any sign of weakness. "Lead the way, Alpha Blackwood." As they moved through the forest, Magnus maintained a careful awareness of their surroundings. The storm had intensified, forcing them to take shelter beneath a massive old pine when the rain became too heavy to navigate safely. Standing close in this limited shelter, Magnus caught another breath of her unusual scent. Beneath the metallic tang of blood and the herbal notes he'd noticed earlier, there was something familiar that he couldn't quite place, something that tugged at old memories. "You never answered my question," Scarlet said suddenly, breaking the silence as they watched the rain create a silver curtain around their shelter, about why the infamous Magnus Blackwood would personally patrol his borders when he has betas for such tasks. Magnus studied her profile, noting the intelligence in her eyes. "The same reason I suspect you travel alone rather than with the usual retinue of a healer. Some things are best handled personally." A smile touched her lips. Fair enough. When the downpour eased to a steady rain, they continued their journey. Magnus noticed that despite her injury, Scarlet navigated the forest with unusual confidence, avoiding pitfalls and choosing secure footing without guidance. Not the behavior of someone unfamiliar with wilderness travel. As they crested a ridge, the Silver Pine stronghold came into view in the valley below. Unlike the stone castles of human kingdoms, the wolf stronghold had been built in harmony with the forest. Ancient trees had been incorporated into the structure, their massive trunks serving as natural pillars. Terraced gardens climbed the surrounding hillsides, and a swift river curved around the eastern wall like a natural moat. "It's beautiful," Scarlet murmured, pausing to take in the sight. "The stories don't do it justice." "You've heard stories about Silver Pine?" Magnus asked, watching her reaction carefully. "Who hasn't? The oldest of the 5 territories, home to the silver pines that grow nowhere else in the world." She gestured toward the distinctive trees with their silver-gray bark that seemed to shimmer even in the dim light. "They say the first wolves made their pact with the moon goddess beneath these trees." "Old legends," Magnus replied, though he felt a flicker of surprise at her knowledge. "The best kind." She smiled, then winced as her wounded shoulder protested the movement. "Though at the moment, I'm more interested in your healers than your history." They descended toward the stronghold, passing through the outer perimeter where sentinel wolves acknowledged their alpha with respectful nods. Magnus noted their quick, curious glances at his companion, but appreciated their discipline in not openly staring or questioning. Word of their arrival traveled ahead of them. By the time they reached the main entrance, Victor was waiting, his expression carefully neutral despite the obvious questions in his eyes. "Alpha," Victor greeted with a slight bow, then turned to Scarlet with a measured look. "We weren't expecting guests." "Scarlet Winters," Magnus said, "a healer who encountered trouble with hunters in our territory. She's injured and will be staying with us until she recovers." Victor's gaze sharpened, taking in every detail of the silver-haired woman. "Of course, I'll have the healers prepare—" "The blue chambers in the east wing," Magnus interrupted, surprising himself almost as much as Victor. The blue chambers were traditionally reserved for honored guests, not wandering strangers. If Victor found the directive unusual, he gave no sign beyond a momentary pause. "As you wish. I'll send healer Mara to attend to her wounds." As they crossed the great hall, Magnus was aware of the stir their presence created. Wolves from various ranks paused in their activities, attention drawn by both the unexpected guest and the Alpha's personal escort of her. Scarlet either didn't notice the attention or chose to ignore it, her gaze instead traveling over the architectural details of the stronghold. Her eyes lingered on the ancient tapestries depicting the founding of Silver Pine, then moved to the massive hearth where the ceremonial fire had burned continuously for centuries. "Your knowledge of wolves seems extensive for a human healer," Magnus observed as they climbed the broad staircase to the upper levels. Scarlet's step faltered slightly before she recovered. "I've traveled widely. One learns to understand the customs of many peoples." Another evasion. Magnus filed it away with the growing list of inconsistencies surrounding Scarlet Winters. The blue chambers were located in a quiet corner of the east wing, offering views of both the ancient grove and the distant mountains. As they entered the spacious sitting room, with its comfortable furnishings and private balcony, Scarlet's composure slipped momentarily, revealing genuine surprise at the accommodations. "This seems excessive for a wounded traveler," she said, running her fingers over the fine blue silk of a chair. "I expected something more utilitarian." "Silver Pine hospitality is legendary," Magnus replied, though he wasn't entirely sure himself why he'd chosen these particular quarters. Something about her demanded recognition, respect, A knock at the door heralded the arrival of healer Mara, a stern-faced woman who had tended the Blackwood family for 3 decades. She carried a basket of supplies and fixed Scarlet with the appraising look she gave all patients. "Let's see this wound, then," Mara said without preamble. "Sit by the window where the light is better." Magnus moved toward the door. "I'll leave you in Mara's capable hands. She's the finest healer in Silverpine." "High praise," Scarlet said, a hint of amusement in her voice as she shrugged off her cloak to reveal the full extent of her injury. "Though I'd be interested to compare techniques once I'm patched up." Mara made a skeptical sound as she examined the wound. "Professional interest?" "Something like that," Scarlet replied, her eyes meeting Magnus across the room. For a moment, something passed between them, an unspoken recognition that there were layers of mystery yet to be uncovered. Then Magnus nodded and stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him. Victor waited a discreet distance away, his expression making it clear he had questions that could no longer be postponed. "Walk with me," Magnus said, heading toward his private study. Once inside the book-lined room with its massive desk and comfortable chairs, Magnus poured 2 glasses of aged whiskey from a crystal decanter, a human indulgence he'd developed a taste for over the years. He handed one to Victor and took a seat behind the desk. "You have concerns," he stated, knowing directness was best with his old friend. "Several," Victor acknowledged, accepting the whiskey with a nod of thanks. "Beginning with why our Alpha was personally escorting an injured woman through a thunderstorm, and ending with why said woman is now installed in quarters typically reserved for visiting royalty." Magnus swirled the amber liquid in his glass, gathering his thoughts. She was being hunted, not for sport, but with intent. Professional hunters who knew what they were doing. Hunters who followed her into Silverpine territory, Victor pointed out. That alone should raise questions about who, or what, she really is. "She claims to be a healer searching for rare herbs." Victor's eyebrows rose. "And you believe that?" "No." Magnus took a sip of whiskey, letting the smoky flavor roll across his tongue. "There's more to her story. But there's something else, Victor. Something familiar about her." "Familiar how?" Magnus hesitated, uncertain how to articulate the sensation. "Her scent. Beneath the herbs and blood, there's something I recognize but can't place, and she knows too much about wolves, about Silverpine specifically." Victor's expression grew serious. "A spy from another pack? Eastern Plains, perhaps?" "Possible, but I don't think so." Magnus set down his glass and leaned forward. "Have you ever heard of an herb called moonflower root?" Victor frowned in concentration. "Vaguely. An old remedy, if I recall correctly, used for pain that doesn't respond to normal treatments," Magnus finished. "Specifically, pain caused by silver poisoning." His understanding dawned in Victor's eyes. "You think she's connected to wolves somehow, not just knowledgeable about us, but possibly one of us?" Magnus nodded slowly. "Though I've never encountered a wolf with silver hair like hers. It's distinctive enough that we would have heard about her if she belonged to any of the 5 major packs. Unless she comes from beyond the known territories," Victor suggested. "There are rumors of smaller packs that survived the Great Wars by fleeing into the far mountains." Magnus rose and moved to the window, looking out at the rain-swept view of Silverpine territory. The council meeting would begin soon, and questions would be raised about their unexpected guest. He needed to form a clearer picture before facing Cormac and his allies. "Have her watched," he decided, discreetly, "and send someone to examine her belongings while she's with the healer. I want to know what's in those books she carries." Victor nodded, finishing his whiskey in a single swallow. "And if she is a wolf, what then?" Magnus turned back from the window, his expression hardening as he recalled the intensity in Scarlet's storm-gray eyes. "Then we need to determine why she's hiding her true nature and what brought her to Silverpine just days before the gathering." As Victor departed to carry out his instructions, Magnus returned to his desk and pulled out a leather-bound volume from a hidden drawer. The book was ancient, its pages yellowed with age, containing genealogies of the 5 major packs going back centuries. He began to search, looking for any mention of silver hair as a trait among wolf bloodlines. It was unusual enough to be recorded, yet he found nothing that matched Scarlet's distinctive appearance. He was about to close the book when a faded illustration caught his eye, a stylized depiction of a female wolf with pale fur standing beneath a full moon. The caption beneath it was written in the old language, but one word stood out clearly: Moonborn. Magnus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain pattering against the windows. The Moonborn were figures of legend, not history, wolves blessed by the moon goddess with special abilities. According to the oldest stories, they appeared in times of great change or danger. Or so the elders had told him when he was a pup. Tales to entertain children on long winter nights. Yet here was a reference in a historical record, suggesting at least some grain of truth to the legend. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter!" he called, closing the book and returning it to its drawer. A young beta named Elias appeared, looking somewhat nervous to be reporting directly to the alpha. "Forgive the interruption, my lord. Healer Mara sent me to inform you that the guest, The beta hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. "What about her?" Magnus prompted, his interest sharpening. When Healer Mara cleaned the wound, she found something unusual. The injury was healing already, far faster than any human wound should, and beneath the blood, Elias swallowed hard. There were scales, my lord, silver scales where the skin was damaged. Magnus stood so abruptly that Elias took an instinctive step backward. "Scales? Are you certain?" "Healer Mara is certain, my lord. She said to tell you that our guest is neither human nor any wolf she's ever encountered." "Where is Scarlet now?" "Still in her chambers, my lord. Healer Mara gave her a sleeping draught while treating the wound. She'll remain unconscious for several hours." Magnus moved toward the door with decisive strides. "Have Victor meet me at the Blue Chambers immediately, and Elias, speak of this to no one else." The young beta bowed deeply. "Yes, Alpha." As Magnus strode through the halls of the stronghold, his mind raced with possibilities. The appearance of a stranger with inexplicable characteristics, professional hunters tracking her, and now silver scales beneath human skin, all occurring days before the gathering of the 5 packs. It couldn't be coincidence. In his 20 years as Alpha, Magnus had learned that coincidences were often the first sign of carefully laid plans unfolding. The question was, whose plan and to what end? By the time he reached Scarlet's chambers, the initial shock had given way to strategic thinking. Whatever Scarlet Winters truly was, she had sought out Silver Pine territory for a reason, and Magnus intended to discover that reason before it brought danger to his pack. Victor was already waiting outside the Blue Chambers, his expression grave. "Elias told me," he said quietly as Magnus approached. "Silver scales?" "So Mara claims." Magnus kept his voice low. "Let's see for ourselves." They entered silently to find the sitting room empty. Moving to the bedroom door, Magnus could hear the deep, even breathing of someone in drugged sleep. He opened the door carefully. Scarlet lay on the large canopied bed, her silver hair unbound and flowing across the pillows. Mara had changed her into a simple white sleeping shift, leaving her wounded shoulder exposed but neatly bandaged. She looked peaceful, vulnerable, entirely at odds with the woman who had faced down armed hunters without flinching. Magnus approached the bed and carefully pulled back the edge of the bandage. Victor moved closer, his sharp intake of breath confirming what Magnus could already see. Beneath the bandage, the knife wound had indeed partially closed, far too quickly for normal healing, and at the edges of the wound, tiny silver scales caught the light, gleaming like miniature mirrors. "By the moon goddess," Victor whispered. "What is she?" Magnus replaced the bandage gently. "I don't know, but we're going to find out." As if responding to his voice, Scarlet stirred slightly in her sleep. Her right hand moved to clutch at something beneath the neckline of her shift, a reflex action even in unconsciousness. Magnus carefully moved her fingers aside to reveal a silver pendant on a fine chain around her neck. The pendant was circular, depicting a wolf howling beneath a crescent moon. But what caused both men to freeze was the small symbol etched into the silver at the base of the design. A crown with 5 points, the ancient symbol of the Silver Moon royal line, a bloodline thought to have been completely destroyed in the Great Wars 20 years ago. "Impossible," Victor breathed. "The Silver Moon line ended with Queen Isabel's death. The entire royal family was killed when Eastern Plains forces overran their stronghold." Magnus stared at the pendant, then at the woman who wore it. Apparently not everyone died that night. The implications were staggering. The Silver Moon Pack had been the most powerful of the 5 territories before the wars, their royal line said to possess abilities beyond those of ordinary wolves. If Scarlet was truly of Silver Moon blood, her appearance now, on the eve of the first full gathering since the wars, could upend the fragile peace they had managed to build. As if sensing their scrutiny even in sleep, Scarlet's brow furrowed slightly. Her hand twitched, and Magnus felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to take it in his own, to offer comfort against whatever troubled her dreams. The intensity of the impulse startled him, and he stepped back from the bed. He hadn't felt such an immediate connection to anyone since Lydia. It was disturbing. "What will you do?" Victor asked quietly as they moved back to the sitting room. Magnus considered the question, weighing options against potential consequences. "For now, we let her rest. Post guards outside her door, for her protection as much as ours. When she wakes, I'll speak with her alone. And if she denies her heritage, or worse, admits it but has come with hostile intent?" Magnus looked back toward the sleeping woman, his expression hardening with resolve. "Then she'll learn why the other packs both respect and fear the Alpha of Silverpine." But even as he spoke the words, something deeper than instinct told him Scarlet Winters had not come to threaten his pack. Whatever secret she carried, whatever her true purpose in Silverpine, the danger surrounding her was real. And somehow, inexplicably, Magnus felt certain that her fate and the fate of his pack were now intertwined. Thunder rolled across the sky outside, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to echo his thoughts. The storm was intensifying, much like the situation within these walls, and Magnus Blackwood, Alpha King of Silverpine, prepared himself to weather whatever was coming. The morning dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the previous day's storm. Magnus stood at the window of his private chambers, watching as the early light transformed the silver pines into glowing sentinels. He had slept poorly, his dreams haunted by flashes of silver scales and storm-gray eyes. In the hours since discovering Scarlet's secret, he had directed his most trusted betas to research anything they could find about the Silver Moon bloodline while maintaining absolute discretion. The last thing Silverpine needed was rumors about a surviving heir of the once-dominant pack spreading before the gathering. A soft knock at his door announced Victor's arrival. The elderly beta entered, carrying a worn, leather-bound journal. "We found this among her belongings," Victor said without preamble, placing the book on Magnus's desk. It was hidden in a false bottom of her satchel. Most of it is written in the old language, but what we could translate— He paused, his expression grave. "It confirms our suspicions." Magnus opened the journal carefully. The pages were filled with elegant script, interspersed with detailed drawings of plants, celestial charts, and what appeared to be maps of territories beyond the known boundaries. Near the center, a family tree was meticulously drawn, the Silver Moon royal lineage traced through generations. At the bottom of the tree, a single name stood out: Scarlet, daughter of Queen Isabel and King Alaric. "The lost princess," Magnus murmured, tracing the name with his fingertip. 20 years in hiding. "There's more," Victor said quietly. "The journal speaks of a prophecy, something about the union of Silver Moon and Silverpine blood creating a force powerful enough to counter a coming darkness. It mentions a ritual that can only be performed during a blood moon." Magnus's gaze sharpened. "The blood moon occurs once every 70 years. The next one is 3 nights after the gathering concludes," Victor confirmed, "precisely when the Eastern Plains delegation is scheduled to depart. The timing couldn't be coincidence." Magnus closed the journal, his mind racing through implications and possibilities. "What of our guest?" "Still sleeping. The draft Mara gave her was strong, but she should wake by midday." Victor hesitated. "There's one other detail you should know. While examining her belongings, we found traces of ash and blood on her traveling cloak, not her own blood. And this." He held out a small object, a silver pin in the shape of a mountain peak. Magnus recognized it immediately as the emblem of the Northern Mountains Pack. "Harold's delegation arrives this morning," Magnus said, taking the pin. "I want to know if they're missing anyone before I meet with them. And double the guards at all entrances. If she's been tracking the Northern Pack, they may have been tracking her in return." Victor nodded and departed, leaving Magnus alone with the journal and his thoughts. He paced the length of his study, considering his options. The arrival of a Silver Moon heir on the eve of the first full gathering since the wars could not be dismissed as coincidence. Either Scarlet was pursuing her own agenda, or someone was using her as a pawn in a larger game. Either way, the fragile peace between the 5 packs hung in the balance. Magnus needed answers before the Northern delegation arrived. Decision made, he strode through the corridors of the stronghold toward the eastern wing. Guards posted outside the blue chambers straightened to attention as he approached. He acknowledged them with a nod before entering without knocking. The sitting room was empty. Magnus moved silently to the bedroom door and found it ajar. Inside, Scarlet was no longer in bed. Instead, she stood by the window, her back to the door, silver hair cascading down her back. She had dressed in simple clothes provided by the servants, a pale blue tunic and dark leggings. Her injured shoulder was still bandaged, but she held herself without any sign of discomfort. "You're awake earlier than expected," Magnus said, making no attempt to mask his approach. Scarlet turned, unsurprised by his presence. In the morning light, her features were even more striking: high cheekbones, a proud jawline, and those unusual storm-gray eyes that seemed to shift between blue and silver depending on the light. "I've never responded well to sleeping drafts," she replied with a hint of amusement. "Your healer miscalculated the dosage needed for someone with my constitution." "Someone with scales beneath their skin, you mean?" Magnus watched her reaction carefully, noting the slight tensing of her shoulders before she deliberately relaxed them. "So the truth emerges," she said quietly. "I wondered how long it would take." "Not long enough for you to disappear again, Princess Scarlet of the Silver Moon Pack." This time, she couldn't hide her surprise. Her eyes widened slightly, and her hand moved instinctively to the silver pendant at her throat. "You found my journal. And the Northern Mountains pin. Care to explain why you're carrying the emblem of a pack whose alpha arrives at my stronghold today?" Scarlet held his gaze steadily. "I took it from a northern assassin who tried to kill me 3 weeks ago. One of many sent to ensure the Silver Moon Line truly ended with my mother." Magnus crossed to a chair near the window and sat, deliberately casual despite the tension in the room. 20 years is a long time to remain hidden, only to emerge now, days before the gathering and a blood moon. Why? Scarlet remained standing, her posture regal despite her simple attire. For the first time, Magnus could clearly see the royal bearing that no amount of disguise could fully conceal. "Because the alternative is extinction," she said simply. "Not just for what remains of my pack, but for all 5 territories." She moved to the window, looking out at the silver pines with an expression of wistful recognition. "My mother smuggled me out of our stronghold the night it fell. I was barely 4 years old. She entrusted me to her most loyal beta, who raised me in the far western mountains beyond the mapped territories. We lived among humans, always moving, always watching for signs we'd been discovered." "And your guardian? Where is he now?" A shadow crossed Scarlet's face. "Dead. 3 months ago. He protected me until his last breath." She turned back to Magnus, her expression hardening. "That's when I found his journals, the ones he'd kept hidden from me all these years. They detailed a conspiracy that began long before I was born, one that culminated in the wars that destroyed my family and nearly broke the 5 territories." Magnus leaned forward slightly. "What conspiracy?" "A group that calls themselves the Silver Covenant. Members from all 5 packs, united in the belief that wolves should rule humans rather than maintain the ancient balance." Scarlet's voice took on a bitter edge. "They orchestrated the conflict between Eastern Plains and Silver Moon, ensuring my family's destruction while weakening all the packs so they could position their own members in key roles." It was a disturbing claim, but not entirely implausible. The wars had seemed to erupt with suspicious suddenness, and their aftermath had indeed seen significant changes in pack leadership across all territories. "You expect me to believe that a secret society has been manipulating pack politics for decades without detection?" Magnus kept his tone neutral, though part of him wanted to dismiss her claims outright. "I expect you to consider why hunters with silver weapons have been increasingly active at your borders, why tensions between the 5 territories continue to simmer despite 20 years of supposed peace." Scarlet's eyes flashed with intensity. "And perhaps most relevantly, why your own mate and unborn child were targeted in an attack that was blamed on Silver Moon sympathizers." Magnus was on his feet in an instant, a low growl emanating from deep in his chest. "Be careful, Princess. You tread on dangerous ground." Scarlet didn't flinch. "The truth often lies on dangerous ground, Alpha Blackwood. Lydia wasn't killed by Silver Moon wolves. She was murdered by the Silver Covenant because she discovered evidence of their existence in your own library." The accusation hung in the air between them, as tangible as the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Magnus fought to control the rage that threatened to overwhelm him, not just at Scarlet's words, but at the possibility, however remote, that they might be true. "You have evidence of this claim?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "In my journal. the pages written in code that your people couldn't translate. Scarlet stepped closer, fearless despite his barely contained anger. I didn't come to Silverpine by accident, Magnus. I came because your territory holds the key to stopping the Silver Covenant before they enact the final phase of their plan during the Blood Moon. Magnus stared at her, searching for any sign of deception in those storm-gray eyes. He found none, only determination, conviction, and something else he couldn't quite name. "Why should I trust you?" he asked finally. "A heir to a fallen pack who appears out of nowhere with tales of conspiracies and hidden enemies." "Because I could have remained hidden," she replied simply. "I chose to risk everything by coming here because the alternative was watching the 5 territories tear each other apart again, this time with no hope of recovery." She held his gaze steadily. "And because I believe you are a man who values truth over comfortable lies." Before Magnus could respond, a knock at the outer door interrupted them. A moment later, Victor entered, his expression tense. "The Northern Mountains delegation has arrived," he announced. "But there's a situation. Harold is demanding to speak with you immediately. He claims they were attacked on the journey here by Silver Moon insurgents." Magnus's gaze shot to Scarlet, who had gone very still. "It begins," she said softly. "Right on schedule." "What begins?" Magnus demanded. "The Silver Covenant's endgame." Scarlet's expression was grim. "They'll manufacture incidents between the packs throughout the gathering, escalating tensions until conflict is inevitable." Magnus made a swift decision. "Victor, escort Princess Scarlet to my private study and remain with her. No one is to know of her presence or identity until I return." "Princess?" Victor repeated, looking at Scarlet with new understanding. "I'll explain everything later," Magnus said. "For now, absolute discretion is essential." After they departed, Magnus took a moment to compose himself. If even half of what Scarlet claimed was true, the gathering was balanced on a knife's edge before it had even begun. He needed to tread carefully, observe, listen, and identify potential Silver Covenant members among the delegations without revealing his suspicions. And he needed to determine once and for all if Scarlet Silver Moon was truly an ally or the most dangerous threat Silverpine had faced in 20 years. The Great Hall of Silverpine Stronghold had been prepared to receive the Northern Mountains delegation. Banners bearing the emblems of both packs hung from the rafters, and a ceremonial fire burned in the massive central hearth. Magnus took his place on the carved wooden throne that had seated Silverpine Alphas for generations, flanked by his most trusted council members, notably missing Victor, who remained with Scarlet. Cormac stood at Magnus's right hand, his dark features set in their usual mask of respectful attention. At 50, Cormac had served on the council for 15 years, gradually accumulating influence through his family connections and strategic alliances. His ambition was well known, but carefully channeled into service to the pack, or so it had always appeared. The massive double doors at the end of the hall swung open, and the Northern Mountains delegation entered. Harold led the procession, a broad-shouldered wolf with a thick gray beard and calculating eyes. Behind him came his daughter Elena, a striking woman with auburn hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to power. They were accompanied by 12 beta wolves in the distinctive furs and leathers of the mountain territories. Magnus noted immediately that Harold bore a fresh scar across his left cheek, still red and barely healed. Several others in his party showed similar signs of recent combat. "Alpha Herald of the Northern Mountains," Magnus greeted formally, rising from his throne. "Silverpine welcomes you and your pack with open hearts and hearths." Harold approached the dais, offering the traditional bow between alphas, respectful but not subservient. "Alpha Magnus, your hospitality is appreciated, especially after the ordeal we endured on our journey." "So I've heard," Magnus replied. "Please, join me in the council chamber where we can discuss these events privately." With a gesture, Magnus dismissed the formal gathering, leading Harold and 2 of his senior betas to a smaller room adjacent to the Great Hall. Elena moved to follow, but her father stopped her with a look. "Daughter, see to our quarters and the comfort of our pack," Harold instructed, his tone brooking no argument despite its courtesy. Elena's expression revealed momentary displeasure before she smoothed it away with practiced ease. "Of course, father." She turned to one of Magnus's betas. "Perhaps someone could show me to our accommodations?" As Elena was escorted away, Magnus noticed Cormac watching her with particular interest. Something in his expression, A flash of recognition, perhaps, raised Magnus's suspicion. Had they met before? The thought was quickly set aside as he closed the council chamber door, turning his attention to Harold. "Now tell me what happened," Magnus said, dispensing with formality. Harold touched the fresh scar on his cheek. "We were a day's journey from your borders when they ambushed us. 15 wolves bearing the Silver Moon emblem, attacking under cover of darkness. They killed 2 of my guards before we drove them back." "Silver Moon warriors?" Magnus kept his expression neutral. "Their pack was destroyed 20 years ago." "Apparently not completely." Harold's eyes hardened. "These weren't untrained rogues, Magnus. They fought with the distinctive style of Silver Moon elites, the Royal Guard, and their leader—" He paused, seemingly for effect. "A female with silver hair who moved like no wolf I've ever seen, more serpent than predator." Magnus recognized the description immediately but gave no indication. "Did you capture any of these attackers?" "No. They retreated when they realized they couldn't overwhelm us, melting into the forest like ghosts." Harold leaned forward. "My scouts tracked them to the edge of Silverpine territory before losing the trail. They're here, Magnus, in your forests." "And their purpose? Did they make any demands or statements during the attack?" Harold shook his head. "They struck without warning or declaration, but their target was clear." He gestured to his daughter's vacant chair. "They focused their efforts on Elena. If I hadn't intervened, she would be dead." The information didn't align with Scarlett's story. According to her, the Northern Mountains pack had sent assassins after her, not the reverse. Either she was lying or Harold was. "I'll double the patrols along all borders and within the territory," Magnus promised. "If these attackers are hiding in Silverpine lands, we'll find them." "I appreciate your concern," Harold replied, though his tone suggested skepticism. "But this incident raises serious questions about the security of the gathering. If Silver Moon survivors have indeed regrouped with the intention of disrupting the peace, perhaps the event should be postponed." "The gathering has been held every 7 years since the first packs formed," Magnus reminded him. "Not once in our history has it been postponed, not even during the worst of the wars. To do so now would be seen as a sign of weakness by all packs." Harold studied him for a long moment. "Always the traditionalist, Magnus. It's admirable, if perhaps occasionally impractical." He rose to his feet. "Very well. The gathering proceeds as planned, but I expect my daughter to be protected at all costs. The Northern Mountains cannot afford to lose its future alpha to ghosts from the past." "Elena will be as safe as any wolf in Silverpine," Magnus assured him, also standing. "You have my word." After escorting Harold back to the Great Hall, Magnus made his way through less trafficked corridors to his private study. His mind worked through the contradictory information, trying to discern truth from manipulation. If Scarlett was to be believed, the Silver Covenant would manufacture conflicts between the packs. An attack on the Northern delegation would serve that purpose perfectly. But who had actually perpetrated it? He entered his study to find Scarlett examining the ancient maps that covered one wall, while Victor sat nearby, watching her with barely concealed fascination. "Your borders have expanded since these were drawn," she observed without turning. "The Western Ridge was neutral territory when I was a child." "Much has changed in 20 years, Magnus replied, "including apparently the resurrection of the Silver Moon pack." That got her attention. She turned to face him, her expression questioning. "Herald of Northern Mountains claims his delegation was attacked by Silver Moon warriors led by a silver-haired female." Magnus watched her reaction carefully. "They specifically targeted his daughter, Elena." Scarlett's eyes widened. "That's not possible. I'm the last of my line, and I've had no contact with any survivors of my pack." She moved closer, her expression intense. "This is exactly what I warned you about. The Silver Covenant creates incidents to drive wedges between the packs. They're likely disguising themselves as Silver Moon to capitalize on old hatreds." "Convenient explanation," Magnus noted, "one that requires me to trust your word over that of an established alpha." "Tell me, Magnus," Scarlett challenged, "did Harold happen to suggest postponing the gathering because of this attack?" Magnus didn't answer, but his slight change in expression was confirmation enough. "Of course he did," she continued, "because the Silver Covenant doesn't want the gathering to proceed as traditionally structured. They want it disrupted, reconfigured, to serve their purposes." She began pacing, her agitation visible. "The Blood Moon ritual requires representatives from all 5 packs. If they can control who attends the gathering or manipulate the proceedings, they control the outcome of the ritual. What exactly is this ritual supposed to accomplish? Magnus demanded. Scarlet stopped pacing, her expression grave. According to my guardian's journals, it will channel the combined power of all 5 bloodlines to break the ancient pact between wolves and humans. The barrier that keeps our existence hidden from the wider human world will fall. Millions will discover what we are, leading to panic, war, and eventually subjugation, either of wolves by humans or humans by wolves. The claim was extraordinary, verging on the mythical, yet Magnus couldn't dismiss it entirely. The oldest traditions of all 5 pacts referenced a pact with powers beyond mortal understanding, one that allowed wolves to shift forms and live alongside humans in relative peace. These are legends, Scarlet, stories told to pups around the fire, as was the existence of the Silver Moon heir, apparently. She touched her pendant. Yet here I stand. Some legends persist because they contain essential truths, Magnus. The barrier between our world and the human world has been maintained for centuries through a delicate balance of power between the 5 bloodlines. The Silver Covenant seeks to shatter that balance. Victor, who had remained silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke. If what you say is true, Princess, then Harold himself may be part of the Silver Covenant. It's possible, Scarlet acknowledged. My guardian's journals identified key members, but not all. He believed the leadership was concentrated in Eastern Plains and Northern Mountains, with lesser members in all pacts, including Silverpine. Magnus's gaze sharpened. You believe there are traitors among my people? I believe the Silver Covenant has spent decades placing their agents in positions of influence across all territories, Scarlet replied carefully. No pack would be exempt from their infiltration. The implication hung heavy in the air. If Scarlet was right, Magnus couldn't fully trust even his own counsel. The thought was deeply unsettling. What evidence do you have beyond your guardian's journals? He asked. Scarlet hesitated, then reached for her silver pendant. This is more than a symbol of my bloodline. It's a key. She twisted the circular pendant, and it separated into 2 pieces, revealing a small hidden compartment. From within, she extracted a tiny roll of parchment no larger than her smallest finger. The complete list of Silver Covenant members as of 3 months ago, she explained, holding it out to Magnus. My guardian sacrificed his life to obtain this. Magnus took the parchment, unrolling it carefully. The names were written in a microscopic script, organized by territory. His blood ran cold as he recognized several names from his own council, including Cormac, he breathed, the betrayal hitting him like a physical blow. The second highest-ranking member in Silverpine, Scarlet confirmed, outranked only by the Covenant's leader in your territory. Magnus scanned the list for the leader's name, but found only a blank space where it should be. He looked up questioningly. My guardian couldn't confirm the identity, Scarlet explained. The highest-ranking members maintain additional layers of secrecy, even from each other. Magnus re-rolled the parchment, his mind working through the implications. If Cormac was truly a Silver Covenant member, he had been lying to Magnus's face for 15 years, possibly longer. The thought was infuriating, but also enlightening. It explained Cormac's consistent push for certain policies, his strategic positioning of allies in key posts, and his persistent pressure regarding Magnus's refusal to take a new mate. I need time to verify this information, Magnus said finally. Until then, you'll remain here, under guard. There isn't much time, Magnus, Scarlet urged. The Southern Lakes and Western Valleys delegations arrive tomorrow. Eastern Plains follows the day after. Once all 5 packs are gathered, the Silver Covenant will accelerate their plan. All the more reason to proceed carefully, Magnus countered. False accusations against council members could destabilize Silverpine at the worst possible moment. Victor cleared his throat. Perhaps, my lord, we should consider what the princess recommends. She's risked everything to bring this information to us. Magnus considered the elderly Beta's counsel. Victor had served 3 generations of Blackwood Alphas with unwavering loyalty. If he was inclined to trust Scarlet's claims, that carried significant weight. Very well, Magnus decided. We'll take measured action. Victor, quietly reassign guard rotations so only wolves we know are loyal stand watch over the visiting delegations. I want eyes on Cormac at all times, but he must not suspect he's being watched. And the Northern Mountains delegation? Victor asked. Treat them with every courtesy, but increase the guards around their quarters. If Harold or any of his people attempt to move about the stronghold unescorted, I want to know immediately." Scarlet nodded approval. "We should also secure the old library in the East Wing. According to my guardian's information, it contains texts essential to the Blood Moon ritual. The Silver Covenant will need access to them." "The East Wing library has been sealed for decades," Magnus informed her. "No one enters without my express permission." "Is that where Lydia was researching when she discovered evidence of the Silver Covenant?" Scarlet asked quietly. The question struck Magnus like a blow. He had never connected Lydia's research in the old library with her death. The official investigation had concluded she was caught in a border skirmish with Silver Moon sympathizers. But if Scarlet was right, yes, he admitted, the single word carrying the weight of 20 years of grief and unanswered questions. "Then we should examine exactly what she found," Scarlet suggested. "It may provide additional evidence and clues about the Silver Covenant's specific plans." Magnus nodded slowly. "Tonight, after the welcoming feast for the Northern delegation, the three of us will go to the library." He fixed Scarlet with an intense gaze. "Until then, you remain here. If what you say is true, your life is in danger from multiple directions." "My life has been in danger since the night my mother placed this pendant around my neck and sent me away from our burning stronghold," Scarlet replied with quiet dignity. "I didn't come to Silverpine expecting safety, Magnus. I came seeking justice and the preservation of our world. I can accept nothing less." The conviction in her voice resonated with something deep within Magnus. Whatever else Scarlet Silvermoon might be, her commitment to her cause was genuine. Whether that cause aligned with Silverpine's best interests remained to be seen. "Rest," he instructed her. "Recover your strength. Victor will remain with you and ensure you have everything you need." He moved toward the door, then paused. "If you've told me the truth about Lydia, about all of this, you have my word that justice will be served. If you've deceived me in any way—" He let the threat hang unspoken. "I understand," Scarlet said simply. "Trust is earned, not given, especially between wolves with our histories." Magnus departed, his mind heavy with new information and possibilities. The gathering, already complex, had become a potential battlefield before the first formal ceremonies had even begun. And at the center of it all stood a silver-haired princess who had emerged from legend to either save the 5 territories or destroy them. As he moved through his stronghold, Magnus observed his people with new eyes, wondering which among them served the Silver Covenant rather than their rightful alpha. The thought filled him with cold rage. Betrayal from enemies was expected. Betrayal from within cut deeper than any silver blade. By the time he reached the Great Hall, where preparations for the evening's feast continued, Magnus had made a decision. He would proceed as if he accepted Scarlet's claims, cautiously, strategically, while seeking independent verification. The stakes were too high for blind trust, but also too high to ignore a credible warning. As if summoned by his thoughts, Cormac appeared from a side corridor, his expression appropriately respectful as he approached. "Alpha," he greeted with a slight bow. "The Northern delegation is settled in their quarters. I've arranged additional security as you requested." "Thank you, Cormac," Magnus replied, studying the beta's features for any sign of deception. "And the preparations for tomorrow's arrival of Southern Lakes and Western Valleys?" "Everything proceeds according to tradition," Cormac assured him, "though there is one matter requiring your attention. Harold's daughter, Elena, has requested permission to access the archives in the East Wing. She claims her father wishes to review the original territorial agreements before the formal ceremonies begin. The request couldn't have been more suspicious in light of Scarlet's warnings. The East Wing housed not only the sealed library, but also the archives containing historical records of the 5 packs. "The archives remain closed until after the gathering concludes," Magnus said firmly. "Tradition dictates that all territorial discussions occur within the formal council sessions, with all 5 alphas present." Cormac's expression revealed nothing beyond appropriate acceptance. "Of course. I'll inform Lady Elena of your decision." He hesitated, then added, "If I may speak freely, Alpha?" Magnus nodded permission. "There's tension among the council regarding our unexpected guest. Several members have noted your personal interest in the woman you brought to the stronghold yesterday, given the timing with the gathering and the persistent matter of succession." "My personal interests are not the council's concern, Cormac." Magnus kept his tone level, despite the surge of anger. The woman is under my protection while she recovers from injuries sustained in our territory. Nothing more. Of course, Cormac said smoothly. I merely thought you should be aware of the whispers. The Alpha's attention to a human outsider, particularly when eligible females from all 5 packs will soon be present, raises questions. Let them question, Magnus replied coldly. I've indulged the Council's preoccupation with my personal life for 20 years. Their patience can extend through one more gathering. Cormac bowed, accepting the rebuke with outward humility. As you wish. Will you require anything else before the feast? No, see to the final preparations. I'll join the gathering at sunset. As Cormac departed, Magnus watched him with narrowed eyes. Had there been a subtle threat beneath the beta's seemingly concerned words? A warning that Magnus's interest in Scarlet had been noted and would be addressed? If Cormac truly was Silver Covenant, his awareness of Scarlet's presence was dangerous, potentially deadly. Magnus changed direction, heading toward the quarters where Victor's mate, Serena, oversaw the domestic operations of the stronghold. He found her in her workroom, directing a team of betas in the preparation of ceremonial garments for the feast. Alpha, she greeted, surprised by his appearance in her domain. How may I serve? I need suitable attire prepared, he said, keeping his voice low. For the woman in the blue chambers, something appropriate for tonight's feast. Serena's eyebrows rose slightly, but she quickly masked her surprise. Of course, I'll attend to it personally. She hesitated, then asked, Any particular style or colors, Alpha? Magnus considered this question. Presenting Scarlet openly at the feast was a risk, but keeping her hidden only delayed the inevitable confrontation. Better to control the circumstances of her introduction than allow the Silver Covenant to dictate terms. Silver and blue, he decided. Formal enough for the occasion, but nothing that draws undue attention. And shall I assist her with appropriate jewelry, perhaps? Serena inquired delicately. Magnus understood the subtle question. Would Scarlet be presented as someone under his official protection? The gesture had significance in pack culture, often indicating a potential mate or at minimum a highly valued ally. She has her own pendant, Magnus replied. Nothing additional is necessary. Serena nodded, reading between the lines of his instruction. I understand. I'll deliver the garments myself within the hour. As Magnus departed, his thoughts turned to the evening ahead. Presenting Scarlet at the feast would force Harold to confront her directly if he recognized her as his alleged attacker. It would also signal to any Silver Covenant members present that Magnus was aware of at least some of their machinations. It was a gamble, but one with potentially valuable returns. And after 20 years of cautious leadership, Magnus felt a surprising eagerness for the confrontation. If the Silver Covenant had truly been responsible for Lydia's death, if they threatened the stability of the 5 territories and the ancient pact itself, then it was long past time they were dragged into the light. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Magnus returned to his chambers to prepare for the feast. Tonight would be a test of wills, of perception, and of strategy. And for the first time in decades, he found himself anticipating the challenge with the keen edge of a predator sensing weakness in its prey. The game had begun, and Magnus Blackwood, Alpha of Silverpine, intended to win. The Northern Mountains delegation's welcoming feast proceeded with all the ceremonial formality pack tradition demanded. Magnus sat at the head of the great table in the banquet hall, Harold to his right as honored guest. Torches and candles cast a warm glow over the gathering, illuminating the tapestries depicting legendary battles and alliances that adorned the stone walls. Magnus had spent decades perfecting the mask of diplomatic neutrality required of an Alpha during formal functions. Tonight, that skill served him well as he observed the interactions around him with heightened awareness. Every glance, every whispered conversation between Harold's people and members of the Silverpine Council might contain hidden significance if Scarlet's claims about the Silver Covenant proved true. Cormac had positioned himself near Elena, Harold's daughter, engaging her in animated conversation. From a distance, it appeared to be nothing more than courteous attention to an honored guest. Yet Magnus noted the intensity in Cormac's expression, the calculated placement of his hand near hers on the table. Subtle signals of familiarity that seemed inappropriate for a first meeting. Your territory prospers under your leadership, Harold commented, drawing Magnus's attention back to their own conversation. I've heard your timber trade with the human settlements has doubled in recent years. We maintain balanced harvests, Magnus replied. The silver pines are sacred to our people. We fell only what the forest can sustain. Harold nodded approval, though his eyes remained calculating. A wise approach. Eastern Plains has taken a different path with their mining operations. Tyrus believes extraction should proceed at whatever pace the market demands. He sipped his wine thoughtfully. It's created tensions along their shared border with Western Valleys. I've heard reports, Magnus acknowledged, recognizing Harold's subtle attempt to gauge his position on interpack conflicts. The gathering will provide an opportunity to address such matters formally. Indeed, though some issues may require more direct intervention. Harold leaned closer, lowering his voice. This attack on my delegation concerns me deeply, Magnus. If Silver Moon survivors are actively targeting Alpha bloodlines, the traditional protections of the gathering may be insufficient. Before Magnus could respond, the great doors at the end of the banquet hall swung open. All heads turned as Victor entered, escorting a woman whose presence immediately commanded attention. Scarlet walked with the natural grace of royalty, her silver hair cascading in waves over a formal gown of midnight blue, accented with silver embroidery. The pendant at her throat caught the candlelight, the small wolf seeming to dance with reflected flame. She had applied no cosmetics, needing none to enhance the striking clarity of her storm-gray eyes or the proud lines of her features. A hushed murmur swept through the hall as she approached. Magnus rose from his seat, aware that every eye watched this exchange. He had arranged Scarlet's arrival at precisely this moment, when the meal was concluding, but before formal discussions began. The timing forced a public reaction from Harold while preventing any private conference among the northern delegation. "My Lord Alpha," Victor announced formally. "Lady Scarlet Winters requests the honor of joining the gathering." Magnus extended his hand in the traditional gesture of welcome. "Silverpine is honored by your presence, Lady Winters." Scarlet took his hand, executing a perfect formal bow, the kind taught to high-ranking pack members since childhood. "The honor is mine, Alpha Blackwood. Your hospitality has been most gracious during my recovery." As she straightened, Magnus saw Harold's expression transform from polite interest to shock, and then quickly to carefully controlled fury. The Northern Alpha's hand tightened around his wine goblet until his knuckles whitened. "Lady Winters," Magnus continued, deliberately using the false name, "allow me to present Alpha Harold of Northern Mountains, our honored guest." Scarlet turned to Harold, her expression perfectly composed despite the tension radiating from him. "Alpha Harold, your reputation precedes you." Harold managed a stiff nod. "As does yours, it seems, though I confess I know little of your background, Lady Winters. From which territory do you hail?" "I've traveled widely," Scarlet replied smoothly. "Most recently from the western frontiers, beyond the mapped territories." "Fascinating." Harold's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your arrival at Silverpine is fortuitously timed, just in advance of the gathering." "Fortune favors the prepared," Scarlet countered, holding his gaze with subtle defiance. Magnus intervened before the verbal sparring could escalate further. "Lady Winters was injured by hunters in our territory. Silverpine's protection extends to all who suffer such violations of the ancient boundaries." Elena, who had been observing the exchange with visible curiosity, spoke up unexpectedly. "Hunters troubled us as well on our journey, Father. Perhaps there's a connection." The question hung in the air, laden with implications. Harold shot his daughter a sharp look that silenced her immediately. "A concerning coincidence," he agreed after a moment, "though I doubt the hunters who attacked a lone traveler would dare confront a formal pack delegation." Magnus gestured to a seat that had been prepared at the table, positioned strategically between himself and Victor. "Lady Winters, please join us. We were just discussing the territorial disputes between Eastern Plains and Western Valleys." As Scarlet took her seat, Magnus noted Cormac's reaction. The beta's expression remained carefully neutral, but a muscle in his jaw twitched, a tell Magnus had observed over years of council meetings whenever Cormac was caught off guard. The beta's eyes tracked Scarlet with predatory focus, assessing, calculating. The remainder of the feast proceeded with a veneer of civility stretched thin over currents of tension. Harold maintained formal courtesy while watching Scarlet like a hawk studying potential prey. Elena alternated between careful observation and whispered conversations with Cormac and other members of her father's entourage. And Scarlet, despite being the focus of such intense scrutiny, carried herself with the composure of someone born to navigate treacherous political waters. When the formal portion of the evening concluded, guests broke into smaller conversational groups. Magnus used the opportunity to circulate through the hall, maintaining his alpha's vigilance while observing the interactions between the northern delegation and his own people. He kept Scarlet in his peripheral vision, noting that she remained close to Victor, engaging various council members in conversation while avoiding direct contact with Harold or his daughter. Cormac eventually approached Magnus, his expression appropriately deferential. "A bold choice, introducing Lady Winters so publicly," he observed quietly. "The northern delegation seems quite interested in her." "As they should be," Magnus replied. "She's an unusual visitor with valuable knowledge of territories beyond our borders." "Knowledge that might benefit Silverpine during the gathering negotiations?" Cormac inquired, his tone carefully neutral. "Perhaps." Magnus met the beta's gaze directly, "though I find her insights on historical matters equally compelling." Cormac's expression remained impassive, but Magnus detected a subtle shift in his posture, a slight tensing that suggested wariness. "Historical matters can be divisive, Alpha, particularly when interpretations differ. Truth isn't subject to interpretation, Cormac." Magnus allowed a hint of steel to enter his voice. "It simply is, whether acknowledged or denied." Before Cormac could respond, Harold approached, effectively ending their exchange. The Northern Alpha's expression was grave beneath its diplomatic veneer. "A moment of your time, Magnus, in private?" "Of course." Magnus nodded to Cormac, dismissing him, then led Harold to a small antechamber adjacent to the banquet hall. Once the heavy oak door closed behind them, Harold's carefully maintained composure fell away. "What game are you playing?" he demanded. "That woman is not some random traveler. She's Silver Moon." Magnus raised an eyebrow, his expression deliberately neutral. "That's a serious accusation, Harold. The Silver Moon bloodline was eradicated 20 years ago by your account." "Don't play the fool," Harold snarled. "Her appearance is unmistakable. The silver hair, those eyes. She matches the description of the woman who led the attack on my delegation perfectly." "Lady Winters was under my healer's care at the time your delegation was allegedly attacked," Magnus pointed out, "recovering from wounds inflicted by human hunters. Unless you believe she can be in two places at once?" Harold's eyes narrowed. "There are ancient magics in the Silver Moon bloodline, abilities not seen in other packs." "Legends and campfire tales," Magnus dismissed, though he knew from Scarlet's journals that such abilities were more than myth. "Next you'll claim she can transform into mist and walk through walls." "Mock if you will," Harold growled, "but my daughter nearly died in that ambush. I won't risk her safety by remaining under the same roof as that woman." Magnus studied the Northern Alpha, considering his options. Harold's reaction confirmed part of Scarlet's story. The Northern Mountains pack clearly recognized her heritage and viewed it as a threat. Whether that stemmed from genuine fear of Silver Moon survivors or from Silver Covenant machinations remained to be determined. "Your daughter and your entire delegation are under Silverpine's protection during the gathering," Magnus assured him. "That protection extends to all guests, including Lady Winters. If you wish to level formal accusations against her, you may do so during the council sessions when all 5 alphas are present." Harold's jaw tightened. "By then it may be too late. The blood moon approaches, Magnus. Surely you understand the significance." The mention of the blood moon, coming from Harold without prompting, sent a chill down Magnus's spine. If Harold knew of its importance, that lent credence to Scarlet's claims about the Silver Covenant's plans. "I understand that the gathering proceeds according to traditions established centuries ago," Magnus replied carefully. "Traditions that have maintained peace between our packs through far greater challenges than disputed identities." Harold studied him for a long moment. "You've changed, Magnus. 20 years ago, you would have been the first to call for blood in response to Silver Moon insurgents. Your mate's death at their hands was a tragedy that occurred during war," Magnus interrupted, struggling to maintain his composure. "A war none of us wish to repeat." "Some wounds don't heal," Harold said softly. "Some betrayals can't be forgiven. Remember that." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Before Magnus could respond, a commotion erupted from the banquet hall, raised voices, a crash, and then a woman's cry of pain. Both alphas rushed back into the hall to find a scene of chaos. Scarlet stood backed against a wall, blood trickling from a cut on her cheek. Elena faced her, a broken wine goblet in her hand, its jagged edge stained red. Victor and several betas had positioned themselves between the women, while Cormac held Elena's arm, apparently restraining her from further attack. "She admitted it!" Elena shouted, struggling against Cormac's grip. "She's Silver Moon, the last of the royal line!" The hall fell silent at her words. All eyes turned to Scarlet, who stood tall despite her injury, her expression a mixture of defiance and resignation. "Is this true?" Magnus demanded, allowing his alpha authority to fill his voice as he strode forward. The question was performative. He already knew the answer, but the public confrontation required formal acknowledgement. Scarlet's storm-gray eyes met his across the room. After a moment's hesitation, she reached for her pendant and held it up for all to see. The silver wolf caught the light, revealing the tiny crown etched at its base, the unmistakable royal sigil. "I am Scarlet of House Silver Moon," she announced, her voice clear and steady. "Daughter of Queen Isabel and King Alaric, rightful heir to the Silver Moon territories." Her gaze swept the stunned gathering before returning to Magnus. "And I came to Silverpine not as an enemy, but as an ally against a threat that endangers all 5 territories." Murmurs erupted throughout the hall. Harold stepped forward, his expression thunderous. "She admits to being the very insurgent who attacked my delegation. I demand she be detained immediately." "I've never attacked your delegation, Alpha Herald," Scarlet countered. "I've been in Silverpine territory for nearly a week, and injured for much of that time. Whatever attack you suffered was not at my hands." "Lies!" Elena spat. "I saw you with my own eyes leading those warriors." "What you saw," Scarlet replied evenly, "was someone designed to be mistaken for me, a deception created to drive exactly this wedge between potential allies." Magnus raised a hand, silencing the growing commotion. "These accusations will be addressed formally, with all 5 alphas present. Until then, I remind everyone that violence against guests during the gathering violates our most sacred traditions." He turned to Elena, his expression severe. "Even provoked violence." Cormac released Elena's arm, stepping back with appropriate deference. The Lady Elena was understandably distressed, Alpha. She believed she recognized an attacker who had threatened her life. "Distress does not justify assault," Magnus stated firmly. "Lady Elena will remain in her quarters until the formal council session tomorrow." He turned to Harold. "Unless you wish to depart before the gathering officially begins?" It was a calculated challenge. Departing now would be seen as a grave insult to Silverpine and a rejection of the gathering's importance, actions no alpha could take lightly. Harold's jaw worked as he struggled with his response. "We will remain," he finally conceded. "But I hold you responsible for my daughter's safety, Magnus, and I formally request that the Silver Moon heir be confined until the council convenes." Magnus considered the request. Confining Scarlet would appear to validate the accusations against her, but allowing her complete freedom might escalate tensions further. A compromise was necessary. "Lady Scarlet will return to the Blue Chambers and remain there under guard until tomorrow's council," he decided. "No one is to approach her without my direct authorization." He turned to Victor. "Escort Lady Scarlet to her quarters and see that her injury is treated." As Victor led Scarlet from the hall, Magnus addressed the gathered wolves. "The feast concludes. All guests will return to their assigned quarters until morning. Silverpine Council members will remain for an emergency session." The banquet hall gradually emptied, Northern delegation members escorting a fuming Elena to their wing, while Silverpine wolves dispersed to their duties. Magnus waited until only his council remained before speaking again. "What happened?" he demanded, looking to those who had been closest to the altercation. An elderly female beta named Lyra stepped forward. "It began civilly enough, Alpha. The Northern Alpha's daughter approached Lady Winters, asking about her healing abilities. The conversation seemed cordial until Lady Elena mentioned something about a silver scale pendant. Lady Winters appeared startled, and that's when Lady Elena accused her of being Silver Moon royalty." "And did Lady Winters confirm this before the attack?" Magnus asked. "Not explicitly," Lyra replied. "She said something about mistaken identities and false flags. That's when Lady Elena struck her with the goblet." Magnus turned to Cormac, who had been nearby during the incident. "You restrained Lady Elena quickly. Were you expecting trouble?" A flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, crossed Cormac's features before his expression smoothed into appropriate concern. "I noticed the conversation growing heated and positioned myself to intervene if necessary. As Beta, maintaining order during official functions is my responsibility." The explanation was reasonable, yet something in Cormac's demeanor raised Magnus's suspicion. Had the confrontation been orchestrated? And if so, to what end? The timing is problematic, another council member noted. Southern Lakes and Western Valleys arrive tomorrow. Word of a silver moon heir in Silverpine will spread quickly. As will news of Northern Mountains violating guest rights during the gathering, Magnus countered. We will address both matters openly in tomorrow's council. Until then, double the guards throughout the stronghold. I want no further incidents. The council session continued for another hour, strategies discussed and security arrangements adjusted. Throughout, Magnus observed Cormac closely, noting how the Beta carefully supported positions that would keep Scarlet isolated while appearing to prioritize pack security. When the council finally dispersed, Magnus made a deliberate detour to the Blue Chambers, nodding to the guards before entering without announcement. He found Scarlet seated by the fireplace while healer Mara applied a salve to the cut on her cheek. Victor stood nearby, his expression troubled. "The wound is superficial," Mara reported as Magnus approached. "It will heal by morning, especially given her unique constitution." "Thank you, Mara." Magnus dismissed the healer, waiting until she departed before addressing Scarlet. "Are you all right?" "I've suffered worse than a cut cheek," Scarlet replied, though the weariness in her voice suggested the emotional toll exceeded the physical injury. "I expected hostility, but not such a public confrontation so quickly." "It served someone's purpose," Magnus noted. Elena's reaction seemed genuine, but too convenient. Victor nodded agreement. The Northern heir appeared genuinely shocked when Lady Scarlet's identity was revealed, yet she approached with that specific question about a scale pendant, something no one in Silverpine had mentioned publicly. "She was prompted," Scarlet concluded. "Someone wanted that confrontation to happen before the formal council, someone who knew exactly who I am and how to provoke Elena into action." "Cormac," Magnus stated, the pieces falling into place. "He was with Elena throughout the feast, positioned himself perfectly to intervene in the confrontation, and has consistently advocated for your isolation since. If he's truly Silver Covenant, as my Guardian's list indicates, then forcing my identity into the open serves their strategy," Scarlet agreed. "It creates division among the packs before all 5 alphas have even arrived. They'll expect me to either repudiate you entirely or defend you unconditionally," Magnus realized. "Either choice creates vulnerability. Defending a Silver Moon heir alienates Northern Mountains and likely Eastern Plains. Repudiating you sacrifices whatever advantage your knowledge provides against their plans. So we give them neither reaction," Scarlet suggested. "We acknowledge my heritage, but focus on the larger threat, the Silver Covenant itself." Magnus considered the strategy. "That requires evidence compelling enough to convince 3 skeptical alphas that a secret society has been manipulating pack politics for decades. Which is why we need to visit that library tonight," Scarlet insisted. "If Lydia found proof of the Covenant's existence there, it still exists. We just need to uncover it." Victor cleared his throat. "The East Wing Library has remained sealed since Lady Lydia's death, Alpha. By your own order. Orders can be rescinded by those who gave them," Magnus replied. He studied Scarlet's determined expression, making a final assessment of the risk versus potential reward. "We'll go at midnight, when the stronghold is at its quietest. Victor will ensure our path remains clear." "And if we're discovered?" Scarlet asked. "Then I'll face the consequences of violating my own security protocols," Magnus answered grimly. "But we need answers before tomorrow's council. Without concrete evidence, your warnings about the Silver Covenant will be dismissed as desperate attempts to shift blame from Silver Moon to imaginary conspirators." The hours until midnight passed with excruciating slowness. Magnus used the time to review reports from his border patrols and meet briefly with the Betas, responsible for receiving the Southern Lakes and Western Valleys delegations, due to arrive the next day. Throughout, he maintained the appearance of an alpha, focused on the gathering's diplomatic demands rather than clandestine investigations. Shortly before midnight, he changed into dark clothing that would attract minimal attention in the shadows of the stronghold's corridors. A soft knock at his chamber door announced Victor's arrival. "The eastern corridors are clear," the elderly Beta reported quietly. "I've reassigned the guards to positions that leave our path open while maintaining security elsewhere." "And Cormac?" "In his quarters, apparently for the night. I stationed a trusted Beta nearby to alert us if he emerges." Magnus nodded approval. "Good, let's collect our guest." They moved through the darkened stronghold with the silent efficiency of predators. Despite his age, Victor retained the stealth that had made him a legendary scout in his youth. The few wolves they encountered were betas loyal to Victor, positioned to prevent others from entering critical corridors. When they reached the blue chambers, they found Scarlet waiting, dressed in dark leggings and a fitted tunic that allowed for ease of movement. Her silver hair was bound tightly at the nape of her neck, though even restrained it caught what little light filtered through the windows. "The Eastern Guards report all quiet," Victor informed them. "We should proceed directly to the library." The east wing of the stronghold was the oldest section, dating back to the original construction centuries earlier. Unlike the renovated central areas with their polished stone and comfortable furnishings, these corridors retained an ancient, somewhat forbidding atmosphere. Tapestries depicting the earliest pack histories hung on walls of rough-hewn stone, and the air carried the distinctive scent of old parchment and forgotten knowledge. At the end of the main corridor stood a set of iron-bound oak doors, sealed with both physical locks and something less tangible, an energy that made the air feel heavy and charged. Magnus removed a key from around his neck, one he had worn since Lydia's death but never used. "No one has entered since that day," he said quietly. "The council believed sealing the library would prevent further incidents. I allowed it because I couldn't bear to face the space where she spent her final days." Scarlet placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Your mate was brave to pursue the truth, even when it put her at risk. That courage deserves to be honored by continuing her work." Magnus nodded, then inserted the key into the ancient lock. It turned with surprising ease, as though the mechanism had been waiting for this moment. As the doors swung open, the scent of dust and old books washed over them. But beneath it, inexplicably, lingered the faintest trace of wildflowers, Lydia's distinctive scent. The library itself was vast, with towering shelves that reached toward vaulted ceilings. Moonlight filtered through stained glass windows high above, casting multicolored patterns across the floor. Massive tables occupied the central space, their surfaces covered with maps and open books, exactly as they had been left 20 years earlier. "It's exactly as my guardian described," Scarlet whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. "The greatest repository of pack knowledge in all 5 territories." "Lydia spent months here," Magnus said, moving toward the central table where his mate had conducted her research. "She said she was studying ancient territorial boundaries, preparation for the negotiations that would follow the wars. I never questioned why such research required so much secrecy." Victor moved to light several candles, providing better illumination while avoiding the brighter torches that might draw attention from outside. Lady Lydia became increasingly cautious in her final weeks. She insisted on working alone and secured her notes each night in a hidden compartment she'd discovered. "Did you ever see these notes?" Scarlet asked, running her fingers lightly over the dusty table surface. Victor shook his head. She shared only that she had found references to a group operating in the shadows of pack politics for generations. She planned to present her findings to Magnus after gathering conclusive evidence. "Evidence that died with her," Magnus finished grimly. "Or so we believed." Scarlet turned slowly, her gaze sweeping the vast library with methodical focus. If she hid her most sensitive findings, she would have chosen a location with significance, something meaningful to her that others wouldn't immediately consider. Magnus considered the library through Lydia's eyes, trying to think as she would have. "The North Alcove," he said suddenly. "It contains texts on pack ceremonies and rites. We spent hours there when we first met, studying the ancient bonding rituals before our mating ceremony." The North Alcove was a small, intimate space tucked between towering bookshelves. A reading nook with cushioned window seats offered views of the northern mountains, though now the glass reflected only darkness. The shelves here held the oldest books in the collection, hand-bound volumes on rituals, ceremonies, and pack law that dated back to the earliest recorded history. "These are the original accounts of the founding pact," Scarlet observed, carefully examining the spines of several ancient tomes. "The agreement that established boundaries between wolves and humans." She selected one particularly worn volume, opening it with reverent care. "Including the blood moon ritual that renews the pact every 70 years. Magnus joined her, studying the faded illustrations that depicted wolves and humans gathered beneath a crimson moon, hands and paws joined in some forgotten ceremony. The ritual requires representatives from all 5 bloodlines, he noted, reading the ancient text, a renewal of commitment to balance and coexistence, and a vulnerability, Scarlett added grimly. If corrupted, the same ritual could break the pact entirely. She turned the page, revealing darker illustrations. Wolves hunting humans, territories engulfed in flames. The ancient warnings are explicit. Failure to properly observe the blood moon ritual would shatter the barrier between our worlds, exposing both to destruction. Victor, who had been examining the window seat, called their attention. "Alpha, there's something here. The cushion has been restitched, but not by the regular seamstress. The pattern is different." Magnus moved to the window seat, running his fingers along the seams of the cushion. Sure enough, one section had been carefully resewn with stitches slightly smaller than the rest. He withdrew a knife from his belt and gently cut along the seam, revealing a hollow space within the cushion. From this hiding place, he extracted a slender, leather-bound journal. "Lydia's hand," he confirmed, recognizing the elegant script on the first page. His throat tightened as he saw the date, just 3 days before her death. The journal contained meticulous notes, diagrams, and copied excerpts from various texts throughout the library. As Magnus turned the pages, a clear picture emerged. Lydia had systematically tracked references to a group that appeared in pack histories dating back centuries, always in the shadows of major conflicts or power shifts. She had compiled a list of suspected members, including several from Magnus's own council at that time. And on the final completed page, written in a hurried hand, was a single name that made Magnus's blood run cold: Victor. The elderly Beta, reading over his shoulder, drew in a sharp breath. "Alpha, I swear on my life and the lives of my bloodline, I have never betrayed you or Silverpine." Magnus looked up, meeting the gaze of the wolf who had served him and his family with unwavering loyalty for decades. The shock and hurt in Victor's eyes could not be feigned. "The list is incomplete," Scarlett noted, examining the page more closely. "Look at the notation beside Victor's name. Confirm connection through?" The question mark suggests uncertainty, an investigation not yet completed. Magnus studied the page again and saw she was right. Unlike the other names in the journal, which were marked with specific evidence and connections, Victor's entry appeared to be a lead still under investigation, not a confirmed member. The timing fits, he realized. Lydia was killed the day after writing this, before she could confirm or dismiss the connection. "Which raises the question," Scarlett said quietly, "of who discovered she was investigating Victor and acted to prevent her from clearing his name." The implication hung heavy in the air. Someone had accessed Lydia's research, someone who knew she was close to identifying Silver Covenant members within Silverpine, someone who had used her incomplete investigation to eliminate her while casting suspicion on an innocent Beta. "Cormac," Magnus growled, the pieces finally aligning. He was rising through the ranks then, positioning himself as my most trusted advisor after Lydia's death. He used my grief to isolate me from others, including you, Victor. The elderly Beta nodded slowly, painful recognition dawning. "He suggested I was too old to continue as your primary advisor, that my judgment had become compromised by sentiment. I never connected it to Lady Lydia's death." "A masterful manipulation," Scarlett acknowledged grimly. "Using truth, Lydia's genuine investigation, to create a deeper deception. Exactly how the Silver Covenant has operated for generations." Magnus closed the journal, a cold determination settling in his chest. "We have our evidence now. Lydia's research, combined with your guardian's journals, provides a compelling case against the Silver Covenant, enough perhaps to convince the other alphas of the threat. Or enough to make us targets before the council even convenes," Scarlett warned. "If Cormac discovers we've found this journal..." A sudden howl echoed through the stronghold, the alarm signal used to alert all wolves to immediate danger. Victor moved to the library doors, opening them slightly to better hear. "Fire," he reported tensely. "In the northern wing, where the Northern Mountains delegation is quartered." Magnus's expression hardened. No coincidence. The Silver Covenant is accelerating their plan. He secured Lydia's journal inside his tunic. "We need to respond to the emergency while keeping this evidence safe. If Harold or Elena is harmed while under Silverpine protection, any chance of alliance against the Covenant will be lost." As they hurried from the library, Magnus caught the faintest scent of unfamiliar wolves. Not Northern Mountains, not Silverpine, but something else entirely. Intruders had penetrated the stronghold's defenses during the very hours when his attention had been focused elsewhere. The game had indeed begun, but the players were more numerous and the stakes far higher than he had initially believed. As they raced toward the growing commotion, Magnus felt the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. The fragile peace between the 5 territories, the ancient pact with humans, and the lives of everyone in the stronghold all hung in the balance. And at his side ran Scarlet Silver Moon, the last heir of a fallen bloodline, her destiny now irrevocably intertwined with his own. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The thought provided unexpected comfort as they prepared to confront the chaos ahead. Chaos engulfed the northern wing of the stronghold. Thick smoke billowed through corridors as wolves in various stages of dress evacuated their quarters. Guards directed the flow of traffic toward the central courtyard, while others formed bucket lines from the well, passing water to those battling the blaze. Magnus, Scarlet, and Victor arrived to find the fire concentrated in the guest quarters assigned to Harold and his daughter. Flames licked at tapestries and wooden furnishings, creating a wall of heat that forced even the strongest wolves to keep their distance. "Elena!" Harold's desperate voice carried over the commotion as the Northern Alpha fought against 2 Silver Pine guards restraining him. "My daughter is still inside!" Magnus assessed the situation with the rapid calculation of a leader accustomed to crisis. The fire had clearly been set deliberately. It burned too hot, too quickly for a natural blaze. More disturbing was the faint scent of silver powder mixed with the smoke, a substance that weakened wolves' natural strength and healing abilities. "Where exactly?" Magnus demanded, approaching Harold. "Her bedchamber, the eastern corner," Harold replied, his eyes wild with fear that transcended politics and old grudges. "The guards got me out first. By the time I realized she wasn't behind me, the hallway was impassable." Magnus turned to Victor. "Organize the water brigades. Focus on containing the spread rather than extinguishing what's already burning." He shed his formal tunic, preparing for what must be done. "And keep the journal safe." Before Victor could protest, Magnus charged toward the burning wing, using his alpha strength to push through heat that would have felled lesser wolves. Behind him, he heard rapid footsteps and caught Scarlet's scent. "This isn't your fight," he growled without slowing. "It became my fight when the Silver Covenant made it one," she replied, matching his pace. "Besides, I can withstand the silver better than you can." There was no time to argue. They reached the entrance to the guest wing, where flames had already consumed most of the outer chambers. The heat was oppressive, the smoke thick enough to blind. "This way," Magnus directed, leading them along a servant's passage that provided a less direct but potentially safer route to Elena's chambers. Even this alternate path was becoming treacherous, with wooden beams cracking overhead and floorboards groaning beneath their feet. They reached a junction where the passage branched, one corridor leading toward Elena's chambers, the other toward a small courtyard that would offer escape. As they paused to orient themselves, a section of ceiling collapsed behind them, cutting off their retreat. Magnus felt the first effects of the silver in the smoke, a heaviness in his limbs, a dulling of his senses that made each breath more labored than the last. Beside him, Scarlet remained steadier, though her skin had taken on a faint silvery sheen that seemed to repel the worst effects of the contaminated air. "Stay low," she instructed, pulling her tunic up to cover her nose and mouth. "The silver powder settles. The air is clearer near the floor." Following her lead, Magnus dropped to a crouch as they continued toward Elena's chambers. The door was partially open, allowing ominous orange light to spill into the corridor. Inside, flames had consumed most of the furnishings, creating a nightmarish landscape of fire and shadow. "Elena!" Magnus called out, scanning the room for any sign of movement. A weak cough answered from behind an overturned wardrobe that had partially shielded one corner of the room from the worst of the flames. Magnus moved toward the sound, finding Elena curled on the floor, her nightgown singed and her face streaked with soot. Her eyes were unfocused, suggesting she had inhaled a significant amount of the silver-laced smoke. "Can you walk?" Magnus asked, kneeling beside her. Elena shook her head weakly. "Tried. Can't." She gestured toward her leg, where a deep gash revealed white bone beneath torn flesh. "Something attacked me, before the fire." The wound explained why she hadn't escaped. It was precisely placed to sever tendons that would prevent shifting or running. This had been no accident. Someone had deliberately injured Elena, then set the fire to ensure she couldn't escape. "I'll carry her," Magnus decided, gathering the northern air into his arms despite the growing weakness in his own body. The silver was affecting him more severely with each passing minute. Scarlet led the way back to the junction, only to find that more debris had fallen, blocking their intended exit route. The only path remaining led deeper into the guest wing, away from the main stronghold. "The balcony," Scarlet suggested. "If we can reach it, there's a drop to the lower gardens, survivable for wolves, even in our weakened state." Magnus nodded, adjusting his grip on Elena as they changed course. The young woman's breathing had grown labored, her skin hot, not just from the surrounding fire, but from mounting fever, a reaction to the silver poisoning her system. They needed to get her to fresh air quickly. The journey to the balcony became a nightmare of collapsing floors and sudden flare-ups as the fire found new fuel. Twice they were forced to backtrack when passages became impassable. Magnus's strength was fading rapidly, each step requiring more determination than the last. Even Scarlet's movements had lost their usual fluid grace, becoming jerky and labored. When they finally reached the balcony doors, a new obstacle presented itself. The heavy wooden bar that secured the doors had been deliberately jammed, preventing escape. Scarlet braced herself against one door, while Magnus kicked at the bar with what remained of his strength. It splintered on the third impact, allowing them to burst through onto the stone balcony beyond. Cool night air washed over them, a blessed relief after the inferno they'd navigated. From this vantage point, they could see the full extent of the fire, which had now consumed nearly half of the northern wing. Below, wolves had gathered in the gardens, among them Harold, whose face transformed with relief when he spotted his daughter in Magnus's arms. "We need to jump," Scarlet said, assessing the 20-foot drop to the gardens below. "Under normal circumstances, it would be nothing to wolves like us, but with the silver poisoning—" Magnus nodded understanding. The fall could cause serious injury in their weakened state, particularly for Elena, who was barely conscious. "I'll go first," Scarlet decided. "If you drop Elena to me, I can break her fall, then help catch you." Without waiting for his agreement, she vaulted over the stone balustrade and dropped to the gardens below. She landed hard, stumbling to one knee before regaining her footing, a far cry from the graceful landing a wolf of her abilities would normally execute. The silver had indeed taken its toll. Magnus carefully maneuvered Elena's limp form over the balustrade. "Ready?" Scarlet positioned herself below, arms outstretched. "Now!" He released Elena, who fell like a broken doll into Scarlet's waiting arms. The impact drove both women to the ground, but Scarlet had absorbed the worst of it, protecting Elena from further injury. Harold rushed forward, gathering his daughter from Scarlet's arms, with murmured thanks that seemed torn from the depths of a soul unused to expressing gratitude. Magnus gripped the balustrade, preparing for his own descent. The stone crumbled suddenly beneath his hands, weakened by the fire's heat, or perhaps deliberately sabotaged. He lost his balance, pitching forward into empty air with no control over his fall. The ground rushed up to meet him with unforgiving speed. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent waves of agony through his silver-weakened body. Something cracked in his left arm, and the world briefly darkened around the edges of his vision. When it cleared, Scarlet was kneeling beside him, her face etched with concern as her hands moved over his body, assessing injuries. "Nothing fatal," she reported, relief evident in her voice, "though that arm will need setting." "Later," Magnus grunted, forcing himself to sit upright, despite the protest of broken bones and battered flesh. He focused on Elena, who was being tended by healer Mara and several assistants. "How is she?" "The leg wound is severe but clean," Mara answered without looking up from her work. "The silver poisoning is more concerning. It's concentrated in her blood in a way I've never seen before." Harold knelt beside his daughter, his expression haunted. "This was no accidental fire." "No," Magnus agreed grimly. "It was an assassination attempt disguised as a tragic accident. Had we not reached her in time, the evidence of foul play would have been consumed by the flames." Cormac approached from the direction of the main stronghold, his clothing immaculate despite the chaos surrounding them. "Alpha, the Southern Lakes and Western Valleys advance scouts have arrived early. They report seeing unfamiliar wolves fleeing through the western forest." "Not unfamiliar," Scarlet interjected, her gaze locked with Magnus's in silent communication. "Silver Covenant. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence. Silver what? Harold demanded, his attention momentarily diverted from his daughter. Magnus made a swift decision. The time for secrecy had passed. Victor, bring Lydia's journal. Harold deserves to know what nearly killed his daughter tonight. While they waited for Victor's return, Magnus had his own injuries tended. His broken arm was set and bound, and a salve applied to burns that had not yet begun to heal due to the silver's effects. Throughout, he watched as Scarlett assisted Mara with Elena's treatment, her hands moving with the practiced skill of someone well-versed in healing arts. "The leg will heal," Scarlett informed Harold as she finished bandaging the wound, "but she needs a powerful counteragent to the silver poisoning." She reached into a small pouch at her waist, withdrawing a folded packet of dried leaves. Moonflower root, prepared as a tincture. It will draw the silver from her blood. Harold looked at the offering with suspicion. Why would you help her? If you are truly Silver Moon, our packs have been enemies for generations. Because the real enemy isn't Northern Mountains or Silver Moon, Scarlett replied steadily. It's those who would use our ancient grudges to manipulate us all toward destruction. After a moment's hesitation, Harold nodded permission. Scarlett mixed the dried herbs with water from a skin at her belt, creating a paste that she carefully applied to Elena's lips. The effect was almost immediate. Color returned to the young woman's cheeks, and her breathing eased. Victor returned with Lydia's journal, which he handed to Magnus with appropriate reverence. Around them, the fire continued to burn, though it was now contained to the northern wing. The distinctive scent of silver lingered in the air, a potent reminder of how close they had come to tragedy. 20 years ago, Magnus began, addressing Harold directly, my mate was murdered while researching ancient pack histories in our eastern library. The attack was blamed on Silver Moon sympathizers, a convenient explanation in the aftermath of the wars. I believe this version of events until today, when we discovered Lydia's hidden journal. He opened the leather-bound book to the final entries. Lydia had uncovered evidence of a secret organization called the Silver Covenant, wolves from all 5 territories working together to manipulate pack politics toward a single goal, the subjugation of humans under wolf rule. Harold's expression transformed from skepticism to intense focus. Such an organization would require decades of planning, members placed strategically throughout the territories. Precisely, Magnus confirmed. The wars that destroyed Silver Moon weren't simply territorial disputes. They were engineered by the Covenant to eliminate the pack most dedicated to maintaining the ancient balance between wolves and humans, and to place their own agents in positions of influence during the chaos that followed, Scarlett added. My guardian kept meticulous records of their activities in the 2 decades since my pack's fall, records that correspond exactly with Lydia's independent research. Harold looked between them, then down at his daughter, who was now resting more comfortably thanks to Scarlett's treatment. You believe this Silver Covenant targeted Elena tonight? Why? The blood moon approaches, Magnus explained. Once every 70 years, representatives of all 5 bloodlines participate in a ritual that renews the ancient pact between wolves and humans. If the ritual is corrupted, or if key bloodlines are eliminated beforehand, the pact can be broken entirely. Understanding dawned in Harold's eyes, exposing our existence to the wider human world, creating chaos that the Covenant believes they can exploit to establish wolf dominance, Scarlett confirmed. They've been positioning their people for generations, preparing for this specific blood moon. The Northern Alpha was silent for a long moment, digesting this information. His gaze moved from his injured daughter to the burning wing of the stronghold, then back to Magnus and Scarlett. The attack on my delegation during our journey here, he said slowly. You believe it was staged by this Covenant, disguised as Silver Moon insurgents? Yes, Scarlett answered without hesitation. Just as tonight's fire was likely set by Covenant agents infiltrating Silverpine under cover of the gathering preparations. Harold's weathered features hardened with resolve. If what you say is true, if Elena was targeted as part of this larger conspiracy, then Northern Mountains stands with you against this threat. He extended his arm to Magnus in the ancient gesture of alliance between alpha wolves. My pack's strength is yours in this fight. Magnus clasped forearms with Harold, sealing the unexpected alliance. Together we are stronger than they anticipated, but we still face significant challenges. The Southern Lakes and Western Valleys delegations arrive officially tomorrow, and Eastern Plains the day after. We don't know which of their leaders may be Covenant members. We know Cormac is involved, Scarlett reminded him quietly, and he's had ample opportunity to communicate with others since our investigation began. As if summoned by this mention of his name, Cormac approached the group. His expression was appropriately grave as he surveyed the scene, though Magnus noted that his gaze lingered on Elena's injured form with calculation rather than concern. "The fire is contained, Alpha," Cormac reported, "though the northern wing will require significant repairs. I've arranged alternative accommodations for the northern delegation in the western quarters." "Thank you, Cormac," Magnus acknowledged, maintaining the appearance of trust while watching the beta carefully. "And the advanced scouts from southern lakes and western valleys?" "Being welcomed as we speak. Their full delegations should arrive by midday tomorrow, as scheduled." Cormac's gaze shifted to Scarlet, a flicker of something, recognition perhaps or calculation, crossing his features before his expression smoothed once more into professional concern. "Lady Winters, you appear injured. Perhaps you should seek treatment as well." Scarlet offered a thin smile. "I'm stronger than I look, Beta Cormac, but I appreciate your concern." The exchange, though brief, confirmed Magnus's suspicions. Cormac was watching Scarlet too carefully, his apparent solicitude masking deeper interest. Whether he recognized her as Silver Moon royalty or simply as a potential threat to Covenant plans remained unclear. "Cormac, please escort Healer Mara and her assistants as they move Lady Elena to the western quarters," Magnus instructed. "Then gather the council for an emergency session in 1 hour. Recent events require immediate discussion." As Cormac departed to carry out these orders, Magnus turned back to Harold and Scarlet. "We must proceed carefully. The council includes members whose loyalty remains uncertain. Until we can identify all Covenant agents within Silverpine, our discussions must appear routine despite tonight's events." "What of the evidence?" Harold asked, nodding toward Lydia's journal. "Will you present it to the council?" "Not yet," Magnus decided. "First, we need to secure allies among the arriving delegations. Southern Lakes and Western Valleys were less involved in the wars that destroyed Silver Moon. Their perspective may be more balanced regarding the threat we face." Victor, who had remained silent throughout much of the exchange, spoke up. "Alpha, if I may suggest, the ancient meeting grove would provide a more secure location for sensitive discussions. It lies beyond the stronghold's walls, but within protected territory. The old magics there prevent eavesdropping by either conventional or mystical means." "A wise suggestion," Scarlet agreed. "My mother often spoke of diplomatic meetings held there when relations between the packs grew tense. No wolf can lie within the grove's boundaries, another layer of protection against Covenant deception." Magnus nodded approval. "Victor, arrange for Harold, Elena once she's stable, and ourselves to visit the grove at dawn. We'll need to establish a clear strategy before the formal council begins." As the group dispersed to tend to their various responsibilities, Magnus found himself momentarily alone with Scarlet at the edge of the gardens. The stronghold behind them still glowed orange with contained fire, casting long shadows across the grounds. In the distance, wolves continued to work in coordinated groups, some fighting the remaining flames, while others treated injuries or secured the perimeter against further intrusion. "You saved Elena's life tonight," Magnus observed quietly, "despite everything Northern Mountains has done to your bloodline." Scarlet gazed up at the smoke-filled sky, where stars struggled to penetrate the haze. 20 years ago, I watched my mother choose mercy over vengeance in her final moments. She could have ordered our remaining guards to fight to the death, taking as many northern and eastern wolves with them as possible. Instead, she focused entirely on getting me to safety. Her voice softened with memory. Her last words to me were, "Break the cycle, little one. Hatred only breeds more hatred." The revelation touched something deep within Magnus, a recognition of wisdom that transcended pack politics and old grudges, a worthy legacy to honor. "One I haven't always lived up to," Scarlet admitted. "There were years when vengeance was all I dreamed of. My guardian understood. He let me rage and weep and swear impossible oaths of retribution. Then when the storm passed, he would remind me of my mother's words and continue my training in the old ways." "The Silver Moon traditions?" She nodded. "The healing arts, the ancient languages, the proper observance of pack ceremonies, especially those related to the blood moon ritual. He believed knowledge would serve me better than anger when the time came to reclaim my heritage." "A wise mentor," Magnus observed. "You were fortunate to have him." "As you were fortunate to have Victor," Scarlet replied. "Loyalty like his cannot be purchased or commanded, only earned through genuine respect." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts as the chaos around them gradually resolved into more organized activity. Magnus found himself studying Scarlet's profile, noting how the firelight turned her silver hair to living flame and accentuated the proud line of her jaw. Despite the smoke and soot that marred her clothing, despite the exhaustion evident in the slight slump of her shoulders, she remained a figure of undeniable strength and dignity. "We should rest while we can," he said eventually. "Dawn will come too soon, and with it, new challenges." Scarlet turned to face him, her storm-gray eyes reflecting the distant flames. "Do you believe Harold's alliance is genuine, or merely expedient in the face of an attack on his daughter?" "Both, perhaps," Magnus answered thoughtfully. "Harold is many things, ambitious, calculating, occasionally ruthless, but his devotion to Elena is absolute. The Covenant made a grave miscalculation in targeting her. They're growing desperate," Scarlet observed. "The blood moon is 3 days away, and their carefully laid plans are unraveling. Desperate enemies make dangerous mistakes. Or become more dangerous because of them," Magnus countered. "We forced them to accelerate their timeline, which means their next move will likely be bolder, less disguised." "All the more reason to secure the remaining bloodlines," Scarlet agreed. "Without representatives from all 5 packs, the Blood Moon ritual cannot be completed, either to renew the ancient pact or to break it entirely." The mention of the ritual brought Magnus's thoughts back to the prophecy mentioned in Scarlet's Guardian's journal, the one that spoke of Silver Moon and Silver Pine blood uniting to counter the coming darkness. He had deliberately avoided raising the topic with Scarlet, uncertain how to approach something so personal and potentially contentious. "There's something we haven't discussed," he began carefully. "The prophecy your guardian recorded regarding our bloodlines." A faint color touched Scarlet's cheeks, visible even in the uncertain light. "Yes, that particular entry. I wasn't sure you'd noticed it among the other revelations." "It was noteworthy," Magnus admitted, "particularly given the timing of your arrival and the approaching blood moon. My guardian believed the prophecy dated back to the original founding of the 5 territories," Scarlet explained, her tone deliberately academic despite the personal nature of the subject. "A time when seers were more common among our kind. The specific wording varies in different accounts, but the essence remains consistent. When darkness threatens to devour the light, silver and shadow must unite. 2 bloodlines, once severed, rejoin to restore the ancient balance." "Poetic," Magnus observed, "and conveniently vague as such prophecies tend to be." A smile touched Scarlet's lips, warming her features. "Indeed, my guardian was fond of reminding me that prophecies are guidelines, not guarantees. They show possible paths, not predetermined outcomes." "A sensible approach," Magnus agreed, "though I found that even the vaguest prophecies have a way of fulfilling themselves, often in unexpected ways." Their conversation was interrupted by Victor's approach. The elderly Beta moved with purpose despite his evident fatigue from the night's events. "Alpha, arrangements have been made for the Grove meeting at dawn," he reported. "I've selected escorts from my most trusted Betas, wolves whose lineage in Silver Pine service predates the wars." "Good," Magnus acknowledged. "And the council meeting?" "Scheduled as requested. The chamber has been prepared with additional security measures." Victor hesitated before adding, "Cormac has been asking questions about Lady Elena's treatment, specifically about the tincture Lady Scarlet administered." Scarlet's expression sharpened with interest. What exactly did he want to know? "The composition, primarily," Victor replied. He claimed concern about potential interactions with Mara's remedies, though Mara herself expressed no such worries. "The moonflower root would only be recognizable to someone with knowledge of very specific healing traditions," Scarlet noted, exchanging a significant look with Magnus. "Traditions unique to Silver Moon healers." Magnus considered this new information. "He's confirming his suspicions about you, then." "While revealing his own unusual knowledge in the process," Scarlet added. "Few wolves outside my pack would recognize moonflower preparations by sight or scent." Victor cleared his throat respectfully. "There is one other matter, Alpha. The guards report unusual activity along the eastern boundary. Wolves moving in patterns that suggest scouting rather than hunting. Eastern Plains markings, though the delegation isn't due until tomorrow evening." "Tyra sending advance guards would be expected," Magnus acknowledged. "But they should have announced themselves at the outer checkpoints." "These wolves are avoiding the checkpoints entirely," Victor confirmed, "moving through the deep forest where the boundary markers are less distinct." The implication was clear. Eastern Plains, or wolves wearing their markings, were infiltrating Silverpine territory covertly, likely with hostile intent. "Double the eastern patrols," Magnus instructed, "but instruct them to observe only, not engage. I want to know their numbers and movements before we confront them." As Victor departed to relay these orders, Magnus turned back to Scarlet. Eastern Plains was most directly involved in the fall of Silver Moon. If Tyrus is indeed Silver Covenant, as your guardian's records suggest, he will view you as the greatest threat to their plans. "I've spent 20 years being hunted," Scarlet replied with quiet determination. "First as the lost princess, then as the last heir. The difference now is that I'm no longer alone in this fight." Magnus found himself reaching out, his hand covering hers in a gesture that was neither diplomatic nor calculated, but instinctively protective. "No, you're not alone. Not anymore." For a moment they stood connected by that simple touch, the contact conveying more than words could express. Then, by mutual unspoken agreement, they separated, each returning to their duties as alpha and heir, leaders preparing for the challenges that dawn would bring. As Magnus made his way toward the council chambers, his thoughts remained with Scarlet, her courage, her resilience, and the unexpected alliance that had formed between them. The prophecy's words echoed in his mind, silver and shadow, two bloodlines rejoined. Perhaps there was truth in ancient wisdom after all. The night's events had transformed theoretical threats into bloody reality. The Silver Covenant had shown their willingness to kill, to sacrifice even pack children like Elena in pursuit of their goals. Whatever came next would require all of Magnus's strength and cunning, all of Scarlet's ancient knowledge, and the united efforts of wolves who had spent generations as rivals rather than allies. The council chamber awaited, filled with faces both loyal and treacherous. Magnus straightened his shoulders, set aside his physical pain, and prepared to navigate the dangerous political waters ahead. For Silverpine, for the 5 territories, and for the silver-haired princess who had unexpectedly become essential to them all, he would face whatever challenges the coming days might bring. The game continued, the stakes higher than ever before, and Magnus Blackwood, Alpha of Silverpine, did not intend to lose. Dawn painted the ancient meeting grove in shades of amber and gold. Silvery mist clung to the forest floor, swirling around the trunks of trees that had stood sentinel since the first wolves claimed these territories. At the center of the grove, a circle of weathered stone monoliths surrounded a raised dais carved with symbols representing the 5 original packs. Magnus arrived first, accompanied by Victor and a small contingent of trusted betas. His broken arm had been reset during the night, and while the silver poisoning continued to slow his healing, he moved with the determined grace expected of an alpha. He had foregone formal attire in favor of practical leathers that would allow for swift action if needed, though he still wore the ceremonial dagger that marked his status. "The old magics feel stronger here," Victor observed quietly as they entered the grove. "The barrier between our world and the human realm thins as the blood moon approaches." Magnus nodded, feeling the subtle vibration in the air that confirmed the beta's assessment. "Position the guards at the outer perimeter. No one enters without my direct authorization." As the betas dispersed to their assigned positions, Harold arrived with Elena supported between 2 northern guards. The young woman looked remarkably improved after Scarlet's treatment, though her injured leg was heavily bandaged and she required assistance to walk. Harold himself appeared to have aged overnight, new lines of worry etched into his weathered features. "Alpha Magnus," he greeted with formal respect. "The grove is as impressive as legends claim." "Few wolves visited outside the major ceremonies," Magnus replied, guiding them toward the stone circle. "Its power is considered too sacred for casual use." Elena gazed around with genuine wonder, her political training momentarily forgotten in the face of ancient magic. "I can feel it," she whispered, "like electricity beneath my skin." "The grove recognizes your bloodline," came Scarlet's voice as she emerged from the forest path. She had changed into simple but elegant attire that blended Silverpine and Silver Moon styles. A fitted tunic of midnight blue with silver embroidery at the collar and cuffs, worn over close-fitting black leggings that allowed for ease of movement. Her silver hair was bound in a single braid that fell over one shoulder, and her wolf pendant gleamed at her throat. "All 5 original bloodlines resonate with this place," she continued, approaching the group with measured steps. "It's why the grove was chosen for the most important pack ceremonies. Here, our true natures cannot be hidden, and no falsehood can be spoken within the circle of stones." Harold's expression tightened slightly at this reminder, but he offered Scarlet a respectful nod. "My daughter owes you her life, Silvermoon heir. Whatever our pack's past conflicts, that debt cannot be denied." "No debt exists between allies against a common enemy," Scarlet replied diplomatically. Magnus gestured toward the stone circle. "Shall we begin? The Southern Lakes and Western Valleys delegations arrive by midday, and we must establish our strategy before the formal council convenes." The group moved to the ancient dais at the center of the monoliths. As they crossed the boundary marked by the standing stones, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere. The air became somehow clearer, sounds more distinct, and each person's scent more pronounced. Even their wolf aspects became more visible to each other's eyes. A shimmer of their other form superimposed over their human appearance. "The truth circle," Elena murmured, visibly affected by the magic. "I thought it was just a pup's tale." "Many pups' tales contain more truth than our scholars admit," Scarlet observed, taking a position that would have been occupied by the Silvermoon Alpha in traditional ceremonies. "The circle simply reveals what already exists within each of us." Magnus called the informal council to order with ancient words rarely spoken outside major ceremonies. "Under moon and stone, in the sight of ancestors, we gather in truth to preserve the balance." The traditional response came not just from Victor, who knew the ritual well, but surprisingly from Harold and Elena as well. "In truth we stand, in balance we serve, until the last wolf falls." Scarlet completed the ceremonial opening, her voice carrying a resonance that seemed to awaken echoes from the stones themselves. "Though darkness threatens, light endures. 5 become one under the blood moon's gaze." With the ancient protocols observed, Magnus placed Lydia's journal on the stone dais where all could see it. 20 years ago, my mate uncovered evidence of a conspiracy that spans generations, the Silver Covenant. Her research led to her death, disguised as a casualty of the Pack Wars. Last night, we discovered her hidden journal, which corroborates everything Princess Scarlet has revealed about this organization. He opened the journal to the pages containing Lydia's list of suspected Covenant members. The Silver Covenant has agents in all 5 territories, placed in positions of influence. Their ultimate goal is to break the ancient pact between wolves and humans during the upcoming Blood Moon ritual, exposing our existence to the human world and triggering conflict they believe wolves can win. Harold studied the journal intently. "Several names here are known to me. Wolves I would have considered loyal to their territories." His expression darkened as he recognized specific entries, including 2 from my own inner council. "The Covenant recruits those who believe wolves should rule rather than coexist," Scarlet explained. "They offer power, ancient knowledge, and a vision of wolf dominance that appeals to those who chafe at the limitations the pact imposes." Elena, who had been examining the list with growing concern, looked up sharply. "Tyrus of Eastern Plains. His name appears more prominently than others." "According to my guardian's records, Tyrus is among the highest-ranking Covenant leaders," Scarlet confirmed. "He assumed leadership of Eastern Plains following suspiciously convenient deaths of 3 higher-ranked wolves during the wars." Magnus reclaimed the journal, turning to later pages. Lydia traced financial connections between suspected members, resources diverted to fund their operations, including the hunters who have grown increasingly active along our borders. Hunters armed with silver weapons and trained specifically to track wolves. "Human mercenaries who don't realize they're pawns in a larger game," Scarlet added. "Once the pact breaks and wolf existence becomes known, these same hunters would be presented as evidence of human hostility toward our kind, justifying aggressive retaliation." Harold absorbed this information with the calculating mind of a leader accustomed to political maneuvering. "A compelling strategy, if fundamentally flawed. Humans outnumber us thousands to 1. Even with our natural advantages, open warfare would be catastrophic for both sides." "The Covenant believes ancient magic will tip the balance in their favor," Scarlet explained. "When the Blood Moon ritual is corrupted, they intend to channel the combined power of all 5 bloodlines, not just to break the pact, but to enhance wolf abilities beyond their natural limits while simultaneously weakening human resistance." "Is such magic even possible?" Elena asked skeptically. "The old texts suggest it is," Victor replied. speaking from his extensive knowledge of pack history. Though at terrible cost. The last time such power was invoked, it nearly destroyed all 5 original packs. The survivors created the current pack specifically to prevent such magic from being used again. Magnus returned to the immediate concerns facing them. The blood moon rises in 2 nights. By then, all 5 pack delegations will be gathered at Silverpine. We know Cormac is Covenant, as are at least 2 of Harold's advisors, and likely several among the arriving delegations, including Tyrus himself, Scarlet emphasized, who will undoubtedly deny all accusations and attempt to turn the other alphas against us. Then we need irrefutable proof, Harold stated. Evidence that even Tyrus cannot deny, presented before all 5 alphas. Scarlet reached for her pendant, separating the 2 halves to extract the tiny roll of parchment hidden within. This list contains confirmed Covenant members as of 3 months ago. My guardian died obtaining it. Combined with Lydia's journal and testimony given within the Truth Circle, it may be enough to convince the neutral alphas. Southern Lakes and Western Valleys have historically maintained balanced positions in pack conflicts, Magnus noted. If we can secure their support, we'll have 3 of the 5 original bloodlines united against the Covenant. 4, Scarlet corrected quietly. I may be the last of Silver Moon, but my bloodline still carries weight in the ancient rituals. Without my willing participation, the Blood Moon ceremony cannot be completed, either to renew the pact properly or to corrupt it as the Covenant intends, which makes you their primary target, Magnus concluded grimly. Last night's fire may have been aimed at Elena, but it also served to flush you from hiding. They now know exactly who and where you are. Let them come, Scarlet replied with quiet determination. I've spent 20 years preparing for this confrontation. Victor cleared his throat respectfully. There is another matter to consider, Alpha. The prophecy. Harold's eyebrows rose with interest. Prophecy? Magnus and Scarlet exchanged a brief look before she answered. An ancient prediction recorded in both Silver Moon and Silverpine histories. When darkness threatens to devour the light, silver and shadow must unite. 2 bloodlines, once severed, rejoined to restore the ancient balance. Silver Moon and Silverpine, Elena interpreted immediately, her political acumen evident. A union of your bloodlines is prophesied to counter the Covenant's plan. Prophecies are guidelines, not guarantees, Magnus cautioned, though he couldn't deny the resonance of the ancient words with current circumstances. Yet they have power, Harold observed shrewdly, especially within the Truth Circle. I can feel it even now, the connection between your bloodlines, strengthening as we speak. Before either Magnus or Scarlet could respond to this observation, a distant howl pierced the morning stillness, the urgent signal of Silverpine scouts reporting an emergency. Victor moved immediately to the edge of the stone circle, where a beta messenger awaited permission to approach. Speak, Victor commanded. Eastern Plains wolves have breached our inner borders, the beta reported tensely. Not just scouts, a full war party moving toward the stronghold, and they're not alone. Hunters accompany them, armed with silver weapons. Magnus's expression hardened. Tyrus moves before the gathering is complete. He means to eliminate threats to his plan before Southern Lakes and Western Valleys arrive. We need to return to the stronghold immediately, Harold declared, his alpha authority evident in his tone. If Eastern Plains attacks while the delegations are still separated, they maintain advantage. As the group prepared to depart the grove, another howl echoed through the forest, this one carrying the distinctive timbre of Silverpine's perimeter guards. 3 long calls followed by 2 short. Immediate danger, multiple threats. The beta messenger's eyes widened as he interpreted the signal. Southern Lakes and Western Valleys delegations report being ambushed en route to Silverpine. They've diverted to the western safe houses but are pinned down by attackers. Divide and conquer, Magnus growled. Classic strategy. Separate the 5 bloodlines to prevent unified resistance. Harold helped Elena to her feet, his expression grim. My warriors will defend the stronghold alongside yours. We can hold against Eastern Plains long enough for reinforcements to arrive, if they arrive. They will, Magnus assured him. But first, we must secure communications between all loyal packs. He turned to Victor. Take our fastest runners. Get messages to the Western Valley and Southern Lake safe houses. Tell them the truth about the Silver Covenant and coordinate counterattacks. As Victor departed to arrange these communications, Magnus faced Scarlet. The Covenant will expect us to retreat to the stronghold, consolidate our forces in a defensive position. It's what any reasonable alpha would do. A smile touched Scarlett's lips as she understood his implication. "But you don't intend to be reasonable." "No," Magnus confirmed. "I intend to take the fight directly to them. While our forces defend the stronghold and assist the besieged delegations, you and I will confront Tyrus himself." Harold looked alarmed. "That's suicide. Tyrus will be at the center of his war party, surrounded by his most loyal fighters." "Not necessarily," Scarlett countered thoughtfully. "The Covenant operates through deception and proxy. Tyrus would avoid direct involvement to maintain plausible deniability if the attack fails. He'll direct from a secure location, likely with a small personal guard." "Exactly," Magnus agreed. "And I know where he'd establish such a command post. The western ridge overlooking both the stronghold and the main approach routes. Perfect vantage point, easily defended with multiple escape paths." Harold considered this analysis with growing respect. A bold strategy, but even if you locate Tyrus, what then? Killing an alpha without formal challenge or council sanction violates our most sacred laws. "We won't kill him," Scarlett stated firmly. "We'll capture him and bring him to the Truth Circle. No wolf, not even an alpha, can lie within its boundaries. His own words will condemn him and the entire Covenant." The plan was audacious, potentially disastrous, but it offered something conventional defense did not: the element of surprise. Tyrus would expect Magnus to prioritize protecting his territory and people, not launching a counteroffensive aimed directly at enemy leadership. "I still don't like it," Harold grumbled, "but I see the strategy." He clasped forearms with Magnus in formal alliance. "Northern Mountains stands with Silverpine. May our ancestors guide your hunt." With plans established, the group departed the grove, splitting into their assigned tasks. Harold and Elena returned to the stronghold with most of the betas to coordinate defenses, while Magnus and Scarlett prepared for their dangerous mission. As they gathered supplies and weapons at a small hunting cabin near the Western Territories, Magnus observed Scarlett checking the edge on a silver-etched dagger, a weapon designed specifically to wound alpha wolves. "My guardian insisted I learn combat as well as healing," she explained, noting his interest. Silver Moon princesses were traditionally trained in both arts, to protect life when possible, to take it when necessary. "A wise balance," Magnus acknowledged, strapping his own weapons into place. His broken arm had been tightly bound and would be a liability in close combat. But he'd fought through worse injuries during the wars. "Your arm hasn't healed," Scarlett noted with concern. "The silver poisoning is still in your system." "I'll manage," he replied dismissively. Scarlett approached him, her expression determined. "There's a faster way to purge the silver, though it requires personal intervention." She hesitated, then continued more firmly. "My bloodline carries certain healing abilities. Direct blood contact can neutralize silver poisoning." Magnus understood the significance of what she was suggesting. Blood sharing between wolves was an intimate act, typically reserved for family members or mates. It created a temporary but profound connection that went beyond physical healing. "The prophecy," he noted quietly. "Silver and shadow uniting." "This isn't about prophecies," Scarlett countered, though a flush of color touched her cheeks. "It's about ensuring you're at full strength for what's ahead." After a moment's consideration, Magnus nodded consent. Scarlett drew a small knife across her palm, then did the same to his uninjured hand. When their bloodied palms pressed together, the effect was immediate and startling. Heat flashed between them, racing through Magnus's veins like liquid fire. He gasped as the lingering heaviness of silver poisoning burned away, replaced by surging strength and heightened senses. More unexpected was the emotional connection that formed, fleeting impressions of Scarlett's memories and feelings washing over him. Her childhood terror as she fled her burning home, years of loneliness and constant vigilance, the weight of a legacy she'd never asked to bear, but honored nonetheless. And most surprisingly, her growing feelings for him, respect layered with attraction and tentative hope. From Scarlett's widened eyes, he knew she was experiencing similar insights into his mind. His guilt over Lydia's death, his dedication to Silverpine, his initial suspicion of Scarlett transformed to admiration, and something deeper he hadn't fully acknowledged even to himself. When they finally broke contact, both were breathing heavily, adjusting to the intensity of the exchange. Magnus flexed his previously broken arm, finding the bone already knitting together with supernatural speed. "That was," he began. "Effective," Scarlet finished pragmatically, though the heightened color in her face suggested she'd been equally affected by the experience. "We should move quickly. Tyrus will be establishing his position now." They traveled swiftly through the forest, using paths known only to silver pine wolves. Distant howls and occasional sounds of conflict confirmed that the coordinated attacks were well underway. Twice they had to detour around Eastern Plains scouts, and once they encountered a group of hunters setting silver traps along game trails. The hunters were efficiently subdued and bound, not killed at Scarlet's insistence, as they were merely pawns in the Covenant's game. By midday, they had reached the western ridge that overlooked Silver Pine Stronghold. From this vantage point, they could see smoke rising from several points around the territory. Diversionary fires meant to spread defenders thin. The stronghold itself remained secure, its stone walls manned by a mixed force of Silverpine and Northern Mountains wolves. "There," Magnus whispered, indicating a clearing where several elaborately decorated tents had been erected. Eastern Plains banners flew prominently, and guards in formal attire patrolled the perimeter. Tyrus always did prefer comfort over practicality. Scarlet studied the encampment with tactical precision. 12 guards visible, probably more inside the main tent. "How do we approach?" "We don't," Magnus replied, "at least not as ourselves." He gestured toward 2 Eastern Plains scouts they had incapacitated earlier, now secured behind them. The unconscious wolves wore the distinctive leather cloaks and silver pins of Tyrus's personal guard. Scarlet's eyes brightened with understanding. Traditional infiltration, bold but effective. Donning the Eastern Plains attire over their own clothing, they approached the encampment with the confident stride of wolves returning from patrol. The outer guards acknowledged them with minimal interest, focused primarily on watching for approaches from the direction of the stronghold. The deception carried them to the entrance of the main tent, where a senior beta blocked their path. "Report," he demanded curtly. "Silver Pine forces remain concentrated at the stronghold," Magnus replied, adopting the clipped accent of Eastern Plains wolves. "Northern reinforcements arrived before dawn." The beta nodded, apparently satisfied. "And the western flanks?" "Secure," Scarlet added. "No sign of Southern Lake's movements toward the rendezvous point." This information caused a flicker of concern in the beta's expression. "The alpha will want to hear this directly. Wait here." As soon as the beta entered the tent, Magnus and Scarlet exchanged a silent look of agreement. There would be no better opportunity. With synchronized movement born of natural coordination rather than planned strategy, they slipped past the tent flap into the opulent interior. Tyrus of Eastern Plains reclined on cushions at the center of the space, surrounded by maps and strategic markers. He was younger than Magnus, perhaps in his late 30s, with the calculated charm and cold eyes of a politician rather than the weathered strength of a traditional alpha. 3 beta advisors attended him, including the one who had just entered to report. "Silver Pine and Northern forces have united," Tyrus was saying, his tone displeased. "That wasn't supposed to happen until after we'd eliminated the Silver Moon heir." "Plans change," Magnus declared, dropping his disguise by removing the Eastern Plains cloak. Beside him, Scarlet did the same, her silver hair spilling free as she drew her weapons. The tent erupted into chaos. The betas moved to attack, but Magnus and Scarlet had positioned themselves strategically, Magnus blocking the main exit, while Scarlet covered the rear escape route. 2 betas fell quickly to their coordinated assault, but the third managed to sound an alarm before Magnus incapacitated him with a precise strike to the throat. Tyrus himself remained oddly calm, rising to his feet with deliberate grace. "Magnus Blackwood, I must say I expected better strategic thinking from Silver Pine's Alpha. Coming here personally rather than defending your territory, a desperate gamble." "One that succeeded," Magnus countered, advancing on the Eastern Plains Alpha. "Your Covenant schemes end today, Tyrus." A cold smile touched Tyrus's lips. "The Covenant? An interesting accusation. Do you have evidence of this alleged organization, or merely the ravings of a traumatized heir and your own grief-addled suspicions?" "We have this," Scarlet declared, producing both her guardian's list and Lydia's journal. Complete records of Covenant membership, activities, and plans, enough to convince even the most skeptical council members once presented in the Truth Circle. For the first time, Tyrus's composure faltered slightly, his gaze fixed on the documents with naked calculation, assessing this unexpected threat to plans decades in the making. "Impressive," he acknowledged after a moment, "but ultimately futile. Even if you manage to return to Silverpine with those documents, which you won't, events have already been set in motion that cannot be stopped. The blood moon rises tomorrow night. The ritual will proceed with or without council approval. Not without willing representatives from all 5 bloodlines, Scarlet countered confidently. Tyrus's expression shifted to one of genuine amusement. Willing? My dear princess, that requirement was addressed generations ago. The Covenant has spent centuries developing alternatives for uncooperative bloodlines. He gestured toward a wooden chest near his maps, including quite specific preparations for stubborn Silver Moon heirs. Magnus tensed, sensing a trap, but Scarlet had already moved toward the chest, her curiosity overriding caution. When she lifted the lid, her face drained of color. Inside lay a ceremonial dagger with a blade of pure silver, its handle wrapped in what appeared to be tanned wolfskin. Etched into the blade were ancient symbols that even Magnus recognized, blood magic of the darkest kind. You wouldn't, Scarlet breathed, understanding immediately what the artifact represented. Even the Covenant couldn't justify such a perversion of the sacred ritual. Necessity justifies many things considered taboo by the old traditions, Tyrus replied smoothly. Your willing participation would be preferable, of course, so much cleaner, but the ritual requires only your blood and essence, not your consent. Dead or alive, the Silver Moon bloodline will serve its purpose tomorrow night. Magnus had heard enough. With alpha speed enhanced by Scarlet's blood healing, he launched himself at Tyrus. The Eastern Plains Alpha had anticipated the attack, however, and countered with surprising strength. The 2 leaders crashed through a table of strategic markers, locked in combat that quickly revealed Tyrus's fighting style to be far more vicious than traditional Alpha training allowed. You've augmented your abilities, Magnus realized as they grappled. Blood magic. You've already been using forbidden rituals. Tyrus laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. The Covenant doesn't merely preserve ancient knowledge, Magnus. We use it, evolve it. While traditionalists like you cling to outdated limitations, we embrace our true potential. Their fight escalated in intensity, destroying much of the tent's interior as they crashed through furniture and support posts. Magnus had the advantage of experience and natural strength, but Tyrus fought with enhanced speed and a willingness to use dishonorable tactics, including a hidden blade coated with silver that he produced from his sleeve. The blade scored a shallow cut across Magnus's chest before he could fully evade. Even this minor wound burned with unnatural intensity, suggesting the weapon carried more than simple silver. Poison? Magnus growled, momentarily staggered by the searing pain. A specialty of our Eastern Covenant branch, Tyrus confirmed with cruel satisfaction. Developed specifically for dealing with troublesome alphas who refuse to recognize progress. Before Tyrus could press his advantage, Scarlet intervened. She moved with the fluid grace of her unique heritage, neither fully wolf nor fully human, but something that transcended both. The silver scales beneath her skin became visible as she channeled her innate magic, deflecting Tyrus's poisoned blade with her forearm, where others would have suffered deadly wounds. Fascinating, Tyrus murmured, momentarily distracted by this display of Silver Moon abilities. The old texts mentioned your bloodline's peculiarities, but seeing it firsthand is quite remarkable. All the more reason your genetic material is essential to our work. The momentary distraction cost him. Magnus recovered enough to sweep Tyrus's legs from beneath him, sending the Eastern Alpha crashing to the ground. Before he could rise, Scarlet pressed her silver-etched dagger to his throat with precisely calibrated pressure, enough to threaten, but not enough to kill. "Yield," she commanded, her voice resonating with authority that belied her years in hiding. "You will face the Council's judgment in the Truth Circle." Tyrus's eyes darted between his 2 captors, calculating even in defeat. "And if I refuse, will you kill an Alpha without trial or formal challenge? Violate the very laws you claim to protect?" "No," Magnus answered steadily, "but we will ensure you arrive at the Truth Circle, regardless of your condition." He nodded toward Scarlet, who retrieved a small vial from her belt pouch. "Moonflower extract," she explained, removing the stopper. "Mixed with silver dust. It won't kill you, but you'll wish it had. Every nerve in your body will burn while your wolf aspect remains trapped, unable to heal or shift." Her expression hardened. A fitting preview of the fate awaiting those who would pervert the sacred blood moon ritual. Tyrus glared at them both with undisguised hatred, but survival instinct eventually won out over pride. "I yield," he spat, "though you accomplish nothing. The Covenant is far larger than one Alpha. Cut off one head and two more rise in its place." "Perhaps," Magnus acknowledged, binding Tyrus's hands with silver-infused rope. "But without all 5 bloodlines, your immediate plans for the Blood Moon are finished. That buys us time to dismantle your organization root and branch." As they secured their prisoner, shouts and fighting erupted outside the tent. The outer guards had finally realized something was amiss with their Alpha's extended silence. Magnus and Scarlet exchanged grim looks, knowing their exit had just become significantly more complicated. "The back approach," Scarlet suggested, gesturing toward the rear of the tent. "If we can reach the ravine beyond the ridge, we can use the underground waterways to bypass their perimeter entirely." Magnus nodded agreement, hefting the now-bound Tyrus to his feet. "Move," he ordered the Eastern Alpha. "Any attempt to alert your guards or escape, and we administer the Moonflower immediately." They slipped out through a rear flap just as Eastern Plains betas stormed the main entrance. The forest beyond the encampment offered concealment, but pursuit would be swift once their escape was discovered. Magnus set a punishing pace, driving Tyrus before them while Scarlet guarded their rear. The journey back to Silverpine territory became a deadly game of evasion and misdirection. Twice they encountered Eastern Plains search parties, forcing them to take increasingly difficult routes through ravines and dense undergrowth. Tyrus, despite his bound state, created problems at every opportunity, deliberately making noise, attempting to leave signs of their passage, and once nearly succeeding in toppling himself down a slope where his guards would certainly have found him. By late afternoon, they reached the underground river system that Magnus had mentioned, a series of caves and waterways that connected various parts of Silverpine territory. These passages were among the pack's most closely guarded secrets, known only to Alphas and their most trusted betas. "Your precious stronghold will be under full siege by now," Tyrus taunted, as they navigated the slippery stone pathways beside subterranean rapids. "Eastern Plains alone might not overcome your defenses, but combined with the Covenant forces embedded in other packs, your territory will fall before midnight." "You underestimate the power of truth, Tyrus," Scarlet replied calmly. "Once the Southern and Western Alphas learn of your betrayal, they'll unite against you. The Covenant has survived through secrecy and manipulation. Neither will serve you now." Their progress slowed as daylight faded, the caves growing increasingly dark and treacherous. Magnus led them unerringly, however, having memorized these passages since childhood. After what felt like hours of difficult travel, they emerged from a hidden entrance near the ancient meeting grove, deliberately circling back to the place where truth could not be denied. The grove itself appeared undisturbed despite the conflict raging elsewhere in the territory. Its ancient magic maintained a bubble of serenity that even the sounds of distant fighting couldn't penetrate. Magnus forced Tyrus toward the stone circle at the center, the Eastern Alpha growing visibly more reluctant with each step. "You can't force me to speak within the circle," Tyrus protested, digging in his heels. "Even if you drag me physically across the boundary, I can maintain silence." "True," Magnus acknowledged, "but your silence within the truth circle would be as damning as any confession. The other Alphas would draw their own conclusions." Before Tyrus could respond, movement at the edge of the grove caught their attention. Victor emerged from the forest path, accompanied by 2 unfamiliar Alphas, a woman with auburn hair streaked with gray, and a tall man whose silver-touched beard and weathered features suggested both age and wisdom. "Southern Lakes and Western Valleys," Scarlet whispered, recognizing the distinctive ceremonial attire of the other major packs. Victor approached with formal dignity, despite signs that he had seen combat recently, a bloodied bandage around his forearm and soot staining his clothing. "Alpha Magnus, Princess Scarlet. May I present Alpha Serena of Southern Lakes and Alpha Thorn of Western Valleys. They arrived under escort after breaking through the Eastern Plains blockade." The newly arrived Alphas studied Magnus and Scarlet with keen interest, their gazes settling on the bound and sullen Tyrus with undisguised surprise. "You've been busy, Blackwood," Alpha Serena observed dryly. Her voice carried the distinctive accent of the Southern Territories, musical yet authoritative. "When your beta said you were hunting Eastern Plains leadership, I admit I doubted." "The situation required decisive action," Magnus replied simply. "Tyrus leads not just Eastern Plains, but a secret organization called the Silver Covenant. They intend to corrupt the blood moon ritual tomorrow night, breaking the ancient pact between wolves and humans. Thorn of Western Valleys frowned deeply, his bushy eyebrows drawing together. Serious accusations, Magnus, though finding Tyrus bound and in your custody rather supports the claim of conspiracy. Take me to the truth circle, Scarlet suggested, stepping forward. Question me there, where no falsehood can stand. I will tell you everything we've discovered about the Silver Covenant, their plans, and the threat they pose to all 5 territories. The Alphas exchanged meaningful glances, communicating volumes in the subtle language of pack leaders. Finally, Serena nodded. A reasonable proposal. If the Silver Moon heir voluntarily submits to Truth Circle questioning, I am bound by tradition to hear her claims. As am I, Thorn agreed solemnly, though I reserve judgment until all evidence is presented. That is all we ask, Magnus assured them. Equal consideration of the facts, free from prejudice or past conflicts. As the group proceeded toward the stone circle, Victor moved closer to Magnus. The stronghold holds firm, he reported quietly. Harold's warriors fight alongside ours with impressive coordination. Eastern Plains forces seem confused by the lack of central leadership, attacking in waves but without strategic direction. And Cormac? Magnus asked, equally low-voiced. Missing, Victor replied grimly. Disappeared shortly after the initial attacks began. Elena believes he fled to report to his Covenant superiors. The news was concerning but not unexpected. Cormac's true loyalties had been exposed. There was nothing left for him in Silver Pine except punishment for his betrayal. Within the stone circle, formalities were briefly observed before questioning began. Scarlet stood at the center of the ancient dais, willingly placing herself in the position where truth magic was strongest. The assembled Alphas formed a semicircle before her, while Tyrus remained bound at the edge of the circle, present but unable to interfere. State your full name and lineage, Serena began, following traditional protocols for Truth Circle testimony. I am Scarlet of House Silver Moon, daughter of Queen Isabel and King Alaric, last surviving heir of the Silver Moon royal bloodline. As she spoke, a subtle luminescence surrounded her, the circle's magic confirming the absolute truth of her declaration. For the next hour, Scarlet recounted everything. Her childhood escape during the fall of Silver Moon, years spent in hiding with her guardian, the discovery of his research after his death, the Silver Covenant's multi-generational conspiracy, and finally, their plans for the Blood Moon ritual. Throughout her testimony, the circle's magic remained active, surrounding her with the soft glow that indicated unvarnished truth. When she finished, Serena and Thorn turned their attention to Tyrus, who glared defiantly from his position at the circle's edge. Eastern Plains Alpha, you have heard these accusations, Thorn stated formally. Step to the dais and offer your response. I refuse, Tyrus snarled. This entire proceeding is a transparent attempt to undermine Eastern Plains authority before the gathering. I will address any legitimate concerns before the full council, not in this irregular forum. Serena's expression hardened. Your refusal to enter the Truth Circle speaks volumes, Tyrus, especially when confronted with such detailed accusations. Politics has always been your weakness, Serena, Tyrus sneered, so eager to believe the worst of those with actual vision for our future. Before the exchange could escalate further, a disturbance at the grove's edge interrupted the proceedings. A group of wolves burst through the tree line, Cormac at their lead, accompanied by several betas wearing the distinctive marks of multiple territories, unified by silver pins identical to those found on confirmed Covenant members. Covenant enforcers. Scarlet identified them immediately, moving to a defensive position beside Magnus. How disappointing, Cormac called out, surveying the scene with cold calculation. We expected better security around such an important prisoner, Magnus. Your strategic thinking has grown predictable in your old age. Magnus stepped forward, placing himself between the newcomers and the other Alphas. Stand down, Cormac. You're outnumbered and outmatched. Am I? Cormac's smile held no warmth as he gestured toward the surrounding forest. Count again, old friend. From all sides, wolves emerged from concealment. At least 30 fighters, their territorial markings deliberately obscured, all bearing the silver weapons and cold expressions of Covenant zealots. They had encircled the grove completely, cutting off all escape routes. Serena and Thorn moved to flank Magnus, while Victor positioned himself to protect Scarlet. The traditional rivalries between territories had been temporarily set aside in the face of this greater threat. "You see now the futility of resistance," Cormac continued smugly. "The Covenant has prepared for this moment for generations. Did you really believe we wouldn't have contingencies for every possible scenario? Release Tyrus, surrender the Silver Moon heir, and the rest of you may yet survive to witness the new era." Magnus studied the surrounding forces with the experienced eye of a warrior who had seen countless battles. The Covenant fighters were well armed and positioned with tactical precision, but they lacked the cohesion of wolves who had trained together their entire lives. They were an assemblage of individuals from different packs, unified by ideology rather than true pack bonds. "Victor," Magnus said quietly, "the old protocol." The elderly Beta understood immediately. With a subtle gesture toward Serena and Thorn, he began to edge toward a specific monolith within the stone circle, one carved with symbols representing unity between the 5 original packs. Cormac, focused on Magnus and Scarlet, failed to notice this movement. "Your silence suggests wisdom, Magnus. Perhaps you finally recognize the inevitable." "I recognize only that some wolves never learn from history," Magnus replied, deliberately drawing attention to himself. "The last attempt to corrupt the Blood Moon ritual nearly destroyed all 5 packs. Do you truly believe you'll fare better?" "We have advantages our predecessors lacked," Cormac countered confidently. "Modern weapons, strategic positioning throughout human governments, and most importantly," his gaze shifted to Scarlet, "the last Silver Moon heir, whose blood will complete the ritual regardless of her consent." Victor had reached the Unity monolith unnoticed. With practiced movements, he pressed specific symbols in a precise sequence, an emergency protocol established centuries ago for moments when the 5 territories faced extinction-level threats. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The stone circle flared with blinding light, the ancient magic responding to Victor's activation. A dome of shimmering energy expanded outward from the monoliths, encompassing the entire grove. When it reached the encircling Covenant forces, they recoiled as if struck, many dropping their weapons as the magic identified them as enemies of the ancient pact. "The grove's defense," Scarlet breathed in wonder. "I thought it was merely legend." "Many legends contain truth," Magnus replied, drawing his ceremonial dagger. The weapon glowed with the same energy as the protective dome, its silver blade etched with symbols matching those on the monoliths, especially those passed down through alpha bloodlines. Cormac's smugness had vanished, replaced by wary calculation as he assessed this unexpected development. Impressive theatrics, but ultimately meaningless. The grove's defense is temporary, a delaying tactic at best. It will fade before dawn, while our forces can maintain this siege indefinitely. "Long enough," Thorn declared, stepping forward with newfound resolve. "Western Valleys acknowledges the threat posed by the Silver Covenant. Our full fighting force approaches as we speak, having been summoned when your attacks on our delegation failed." "As does Southern Lakes," Serena added firmly. "The old alliances are renewed in the face of this treachery. 4 of the 5 original bloodlines stand united against you, Covenant dogs." Cormac's expression darkened with genuine concern for the first time. He exchanged glances with his lieutenants, clearly reassessing their strategic position. The unified opposition of 4 territories represented a far greater threat than they had anticipated. Using this moment of uncertainty, Magnus addressed the assembled Covenant forces directly. "Those who surrender now will receive fair trial before the full council. Those who persist in this treason will face execution without ceremony or honor. Choose wisely." His words, delivered with the full authority of an alpha protecting his territory, resonated even through the magical barrier. Several of the younger Covenant members hesitated visibly, their conviction wavering in the face of united alpha opposition. Cormac recognized the deteriorating morale immediately. "Hold firm," he commanded. "Remember your oaths to the Covenant. The Blood Moon comes tomorrow night. We need only maintain our position until then." But the damage was done. As doubt spread through their ranks, the Covenant's fragile unity began to fracture. Individual wolves, particularly those from Silver Pine and other territories with alphas present, found their innate pack loyalty conflicting with Covenant indoctrination. Seeing their advantage, Magnus moved to the edge of the protective barrier, addressing the wavering forces directly. Return to your true packs, renounce the covenant, and help us restore the proper balance before the blood moon rises. This is your only opportunity for redemption." The first defection came from a young silver pine beta who had served under Cormac for years. Throwing down his silver weapons, he stepped away from the covenant line and approached the barrier with head bowed in submission. The magical dome parted for him, recognizing his sincere rejection of the covenant's corruption. Others followed, first in ones and twos, then in larger groups, as the contagion of renewed pack loyalty spread through the ranks. Cormac watched in impotent rage as his fighting force disintegrated before his eyes. "Fools and cowards," he snarled. "The Covenant remembers those who betray its cause." "The Covenant is finished, Cormac," Magnus stated with quiet certainty. "Even now, loyal wolves throughout the 5 territories are identifying and capturing your remaining members. By dawn, your entire network will be exposed." Cormac's face contorted with fury as he witnessed the collapse of plans decades in the making. With a roar that was more beast than man, he began to change, his form shifting with unnatural speed into a wolf of impossible size and power. Black fur rippled with veins of silver, and his eyes glowed with unholy fire. The assembled alphas recoiled in shock at the abomination before them. "Blood magic," Thorn gasped. "He's perverted the sacred transformation." "This is the power the Covenant offers," Cormac growled, his voice distorted by his half-transformed state. "The next evolution of our kind, freed from ancient limitations." Without warning, he charged the protective barrier, his enhanced form smashing against it with enough force to create visible fractures in the magical dome. Victor stumbled backward, blood trickling from his nose as he struggled to maintain the ancient protection. "The barrier won't hold against such corruption," Serena warned, drawing her own ceremonial blade. "We must confront him directly." Magnus moved toward the weakening section of the barrier, his ceremonial dagger gleaming with protective magic. "Cormac is mine. His betrayal of Silverpine, of Lydia, demands justice." Scarlet stepped to his side, silver scales now visible across her skin as she called upon her bloodline's unique abilities. "Not yours alone. The prophecy spoke of silver and shadow united. This is what it meant, confronting corruption together." The barrier shattered beneath Cormac's third assault, sending fragments of magical energy scattering like glass. He lunged forward, a nightmare fusion of wolf and man, driven by rage and the corrupting influence of forbidden blood rituals. Magnus and Scarlet met his charge in perfect synchronization. Where Magnus attacked with traditional alpha power and precision, Scarlet complemented him with the fluid adaptability unique to Silver Moon. They moved as if they had trained together for years rather than days, each instinctively covering the other's vulnerabilities. Cormac fought with the desperate fury of a fanatic who sees his life's purpose crumbling before him. "You cannot stop what's coming," he snarled between attacks. "The Covenant has roots in places you cannot reach. The old world is dying." "Not dying," Magnus countered, deflecting a swipe of unnaturally elongated claws. "Evolving, but through cooperation, not domination." Scarlet moved in perfect harmony with Magnus, her silver-etched dagger finding gaps in Cormac's defense where traditional weapons would have failed. "The 5 bloodlines united as equals," she added, "as our ancestors intended." Their coordinated assault drove Cormac backwards step by step. The corrupted beta's enhanced strength began to wane as the blood magic consumed his natural resources. Dark veins spread across his fur, his life force sacrificed for temporary power. "This is your legacy, Cormac," Magnus told him, as they cornered him against one of the ancient monoliths. "Not evolution, but perversion. Not strength, but slow death." With a final, desperate surge, Cormac launched himself at Magnus, aiming for his throat with the single-minded intent of taking the Alpha with him. But Scarlet was there, her reflexes preternaturally fast as she intercepted the attack. Her dagger found Cormac's heart at the exact moment Magnus's blade severed the corrupted beta's spine. They held him suspended between them for a heartbeat before his body collapsed, the unnatural energies dissipating in wisps of silvery smoke. A profound silence fell over the grove as Cormac's remaining followers threw down their weapons in full surrender. The defiance had gone out of them at the sight of their leader's defeat and the unified strength of 4 territorial alphas. Scarlet knelt beside Cormac's body, her expression solemn. He believed he was creating a better future for wolves, That's the true tragedy of the Covenant. It corrupted genuine concern for our kind's survival into something monstrous. The road to ruin is often paved with misguided ideals, Thorne observed gravely. Magnus placed a hand on Scarlet's shoulder, helping her to her feet. We'll honor his original intentions while condemning his methods. That's the most mercy we can offer. The remaining hours before nightfall were spent securing prisoners, coordinating with forces at the stronghold, and preparing for the blood moon ritual that would take place the following evening. Tyrus was placed under the combined guard of all 4 territories, stripped of his alpha status by formal decree of the United Council. As darkness settled over the grove, Magnus found Scarlet standing alone at its edge, gazing up at the waxing moon that would become full and blood-red tomorrow night. "Having doubts?" he asked, joining her in contemplation of the night sky. "Not doubts," she replied thoughtfully. "More, wondering what comes after. I've spent 20 years with a single purpose, protecting the ancient pact, preserving my bloodline's knowledge. Now that the immediate threat is neutralized, I find myself facing an uncertain future." "Not entirely uncertain," Magnus suggested carefully. "The Silver Moon territories have stood empty for 2 decades. With the truth about the wars finally revealed, those lands could be restored to their rightful heir." Scarlet turned to face him, her expression complex with emotions too numerous to name. "A queen without a people? The Silver Moon Pack was decimated, Magnus. A handful of survivors scattered to the winds, most likely assimilated into other territories by now. Then perhaps it's time for a new beginning." Magnus took her hand, the simple contact sending echoes of their earlier blood connection rippling between them. The prophecy spoke of bloodlines rejoined. Perhaps that means more than a temporary alliance. Understanding dawned in her eyes. A formal union between Silver Pine and Silver Moon. Politically, it would create a powerful stabilizing force within the 5 territories. "Politics is the least of my considerations," Magnus admitted, his voice deepening with emotion rarely displayed. "When Lydia died, I believed I would never find that connection again. I made peace with solitude, but then you appeared, upending everything I thought I knew about my past, my territory's future, and my own heart." A smile touched Scarlet's lips, transforming her features with warmth that belied her silver coloring. "Is this a formal proposal, Alpha Blackwood?" "It is," Magnus confirmed, his weathered features softening with genuine affection. "Not simply for political advantage or prophetic fulfillment, but because in you, I've found someone who challenges me, compliments me, and understands the weight of leadership as few others could." Before Scarlet could respond, Victor approached, his expression apologetic for interrupting but urgent with news. "Alpha Magnus, Princess Scarlet, the southern and western delegations have arrived in full at the stronghold. The Eastern Plains forces have surrendered entirely, and preliminary preparations for tomorrow's ritual have begun." "Thank you, Victor," Magnus acknowledged. "We'll return shortly." The elderly Beta bowed and departed, though not before casting a knowing glance between them. When they were alone again, Scarlet turned back to Magnus. "The Blood Moon ritual requires representatives from all 5 bloodlines," she said, her tone deliberately neutral. "A mating ceremony performed beneath its light would carry particular significance, binding not just 2 wolves, but 2 lineages." "Is that a yes?" Magnus asked, his characteristic directness returning. Scarlet's laughter, rich and genuine, echoed through the grove, perhaps the first truly carefree sound she had made in 20 years. "It is a yes, Magnus Blackwood, though I warn you, Silver Moon queens have traditionally been strong-willed and difficult to manage." "I would expect nothing less," he replied, drawing her closer. "Silver Pine has never needed a decorative queen, but a true partner in leadership." Their kiss, when it came, was gentle but carried undertones of the strength they both possessed, a perfect balance of tenderness and power that embodied the union their bloodlines would create. Above them, the nearly full moon blessed their joining with silver light, a preview of tomorrow's more formal ceremony. The following day passed in a flurry of preparations. Warriors from all 5 territories worked together to secure the borders against any remaining Covenant forces. Healers tended the wounded, while historians and record-keepers began the monumental task of documenting the conspiracy that had nearly destroyed them all. By evening, the ancient meeting grove had been transformed for the dual purpose of renewing the pact and formalizing the union between Silver Pine and Silver Moon. Representatives from all 5 territories gathered in their ceremonial attire, traditional rivalries set aside in recognition of how close they had come to destruction. As the sun set and twilight deepened, the mood grew solemn. Elena, representing northern mountains alongside her father, approached Scarlet with a bundle wrapped in ceremonial cloth. "These belong to your mother," she explained, unveiling a set of silver armbands etched with the silver moon crest. "They were taken as trophies during the wars. It seems only right they should be returned to you for this ceremony." Scarlet accepted the heirlooms with genuine gratitude, recognizing the gesture for what it was, not merely the return of stolen property, but a symbolic acknowledgement of past wrongs and the hope for a different future. As full darkness descended, the moon began to rise, larger than normal and tinged with the distinctive copper red that gave the blood moon its name. Its light transformed the grove, awakening ancient energies that had slumbered for decades. Magnus took his position at the center of the stone circle, dressed in the formal attire of a silver pine alpha, dark leathers accented with silver that caught the moonlight. Around his neck hung the ceremonial alpha medallion that had been passed down through generations of Blackwood leaders. Scarlet joined him, wearing a gown that blended traditions from both territories, silver pine practicality with silver moon elegance. Her mother's armbands gleamed on her upper arms, and her silver hair had been intricately braided with small white flowers in the ancient style of her bloodline. The alphas of the remaining territories formed a circle around them, each holding an artifact representing their pack's contribution to the ancient pact. Harold with a stone bowl of mountain spring water, Serena with a vial of southern healing oils, Thorn with western timber fashioned into a ceremonial bowl, and a representative from Eastern Plains, not Tyrus, but an elderly female beta who had opposed the covenant from within, holding a handful of their territory's rich soil. Victor, as keeper of ceremonies, began the ritual with words that had remained unchanged for centuries. Under the blood moon's gaze, 5 become one. Separate in strength, united in purpose, guardians of the balance that preserves all. Each territorial representative added their element to the ceremonial bowl: water, oil, timber, earth, creating a mixture that represented the interdependence of the 5 territories. When it came time for the final element, Magnus and Scarlet stepped forward together. "Silver and shadow," Magnus intoned, drawing his ceremonial dagger. "Once severed, now rejoined," Scarlet completed, extending her palm. Together, they added drops of their blood to the mixture, the final catalyst that would renew the ancient pact and simultaneously bind their bloodlines. As their blood mingled with the other elements, the entire grove illuminated with silver-blue light that spiraled upward toward the blood moon. The ancient barrier between wolf and human worlds strengthened visibly, not as a wall of separation, but as a protective veil that allowed coexistence without conflict. Those with the sensitivity to perceive such things could feel the magic settling into place, securing another 70 years of balance. But the ceremony wasn't complete. As the territorial representatives stepped back, Magnus and Scarlet remained at the center of the circle. Victor approached, carrying 2 silver goblets filled with a mixture representing both territories: pine sap from Silver Pine's ancient forests and moonflower extract from Silver Moon's traditional medicine. "2 alphas stand before us," Victor announced to the assembled witnesses. "2 bloodlines seek to become one, as it was in the beginning when the first pacts formed through alliance rather than conquest. So it shall be again." Magnus and Scarlet exchanged goblets in the traditional gesture, each drinking from the cup the other had held, symbolically accepting everything the other brought to their union. "With this sharing," Magnus stated formally, "I bind Silver Pine to Silver Moon, my strength to your wisdom, my territory to your legacy." "With this sharing," Scarlet echoed, "I bind Silver Moon to Silver Pine, my heritage to your future, my knowledge to your protection." Together they completed the ancient words: 2 packs, 1 purpose, 2 hearts, 1 bond, until the last wolf falls. The assembled witnesses responded with the traditional howl of celebration, a sound that hadn't been heard in the grove for generations. Human throats gave voice to wolf souls, the sound echoing through the forest and up toward the blood moon that blessed their union. As the formal ceremony concluded and the gathering transitioned to celebration, Magnus and Scarlet found a moment of privacy at the edge of the grove. "So," Magnus said with uncharacteristic lightness. "Queen of Silver Pine and Silver Moon, are you prepared for the challenges ahead?" Scarlet's eyes gleamed with determination and hope in equal measure. "Rebuilding Silver Moon territories, integrating our packs, dismantling the remaining Covenant cells, establishing new traditions while honoring the old," she smiled. "It seems we have work enough for several lifetimes." "Fortunately," Magnus replied, drawing her close, "we have exactly that ahead of us." Above them, the blood moon continued its journey across the night sky, its light a promise rather than a threat. The ancient pact had been renewed, stronger than before through the union of bloodlines, once divided by manipulation and mistrust. In the coming weeks and months, the 5 territories would begin a new chapter, not erasing their separate identities, but embracing the strength that came from genuine alliance. The Silver Covenant's remaining cells would be identified and dismantled. Eastern Plains would rebuild under leadership dedicated to cooperation rather than dominance. And at the center of these changes, guiding with the wisdom born of hardship and the strength tempered by compassion, would stand the Alpha pair who had fulfilled an ancient prophecy not through blind acceptance of fate, but through conscious choice and determined action. Silver and Shadow, once severed, now rejoined. Guardians of the Silver Pines, protectors of the ancient balance, architects of a future where differences strengthened rather than divided the 5 bloodlines. As the celebration continued around them, Magnus and Scarlet exchanged a look that needed no words, a promise, a partnership, and a beginning all contained in a single shared glance. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced the Covenant, together, balancing each other's strengths and weaknesses in perfect harmony. The blood moon blessed their union one final time before continuing its celestial journey, leaving behind a world forever changed by the courage of 2 wolves who had dared to challenge fate and forge their own destiny.